Hello everyone. If you like this audiobook and want to listen to more, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, like it as well, enjoy.
Chapter 1. The Refuge. September 22nd, Raccoon City. Weeks have passed, or maybe months. Time has become a kind of thick liquid, difficult to measure when each day is just a new effort to leave no trace. I managed to disappear. I slipped through the shadows, cut ties, erased my tracks. It wasn't easy. The high table doesn't give up. Their fingers are long and reach the most unexpected places. But the world is bigger than they think, and sometimes, the best way to hide is simply to stop running. To let them think you're dead. That's my plan. That's why I'm here. I found this place on an old road map I bought at a gas station. A tiny dot, barely a smudge of ink, somewhere in the United States. The road leading here isn't even paved. It's called Raccoon City, an irony that's not lost on me. It's a normal town, though not as big as the ones I know. There are people on the streets, cars in traffic, and businesses open. The tranquility isn't that of an abandoned place, but of a town that lives at a slower pace. The calm is almost deafening. There is nothing, no one. The silence burns my ears. I'm so used to the noise, the roar of gunshots, the crunch of bones. This peace is strange, almost unnatural. At night, the only light is the moon, and in the morning, my only company is the chirping of birds. It's a place isolated enough that no one would look for me here. The end of the road. The place where the man I once was, and the man I became, can finally rest. I've stored everything I need. There's ammo, weapons, and some supplies. I'm not going to let my guard down. I can't. My gut tells me something isn't quite right. There's a heavy air, a smell of something I can't quite place. It's subtle, but it's there. It smells of damp, rust, and a chemical product that's familiar from my dirtiest contracts. But I'm not dwelling on it. I'm becoming paranoid. It's the life I led. The price you pay for survival. I settled into a roadside motel, one of those places that smells of tobacco and broken dreams. It's enough. It's my new fortress, my new home, my peace. 2 days later, John Wick had already grown accustomed to the monotony of Raccoon City. His routine was simple. Wake up early, a morning walk that was more a silent reconnaissance, a meal at a local diner where he spent more time listening than eating, and the rest of the day observing. In those 2 days, one conversation in particular had become a recurring theme, the incident in the Arklay Mountains. He had investigated what little he could. The news on television was vague, speaking of an accident at a mansion, the missing Bravo team of STARS, and the Alpha team sent to investigate. He had filled in the gaps with fragments of conversations he'd picked up on the street, in the cafeteria, at the motel reception. The people were uneasy, the animals were acting strangely, and the rumors of cannibalism in the woods were becoming harder and harder to ignore. The information didn't surprise him. In his world, silence was usually a sign that something big, something dangerous, was brewing. They weren't conspiracies, they were data points. The chemical smell, the strange stillness, and now the reports of an elite team gone missing in a nearby forest. The sum of the parts was all too familiar. Paranoia was a luxury he couldn't afford. It wasn't paranoia if the threat was real. In the afternoon, John decided it was time to go to the source. He wasn't looking for trouble, but knowing where the police station was would allow him to plot an escape route if necessary. He put on his suit, made sure his bag was securely closed, and left the motel. He walked calmly, without drawing attention, to the imposing brick structure of the police station. He entered the lobby, which was surprisingly quiet for a downtown area. He approached the counter, where a bored-looking officer was reviewing some papers. "Excuse me," John said in a low voice. "I'm new in town. Could you tell me where I could get a map of the area?" The officer looked up and eyed him up and down, his gaze stopping on John's expensive suit, and pointed to a brochure on the counter. "There's one there. You can take it." John took a map, but he didn't leave. He moved to a corner, pretending to study it, while his ears tuned into the conversations of the nearby cops. "It's crazy, don't you think?" a middle-aged officer murmured to his partner. "Barry left town, Chris disappeared without a word, and now Jill has been discharged from her STARS post and is being watched. They don't want us talking about this." The other officer nodded, his face grim. "I know, it's like the police chief wants to cover the whole thing up. And now, who's going to help us? Wesker was supposed to be in charge. Wesker's dead, we don't need to think about him," the first officer shuddered. But I wonder what's going on, and I'm afraid this is just the beginning. The man's second sentence resonated in John's mind. Something big enough. The words were like a confirmation of what he already suspected. The instinct that had kept him alive in a world of assassins was now screaming at him. This wasn't a cult, this was something else, and his refuge, his supposed peace, was nothing more than a pause. And he knew, deep down, that the pause would not last. With the map in hand, John left the police station and went back to the streets. He knew the weapons he carried were reliable, but a professional always gets to know their surroundings. He stopped to study the map, his eyes settling on the location of the only gun store in town. It was the next logical step. He needed to know what kind of bullets were moving around here, what kind of weaponry the people of Raccoon City handled. An assassin is only as good as the information he has. The shop, called Kendo Gun Shop, was on a side street, away from the downtown hustle. The smell of oil, gunpowder, and steel felt as familiar as his own home. Inside, a man in his 40s, with a neat beard and a leather apron, was cleaning a shotgun. "Good afternoon," John greeted. The man looked up. "Good afternoon, friend. Welcome to Raccoon City. I'm Robert Kendo. How can I help you?" John took a moment to scan the place. The weapons were on display, clean and well maintained. They weren't guns for an army, but hunting rifles and personal defense shotguns. "Just looking," John said, his voice as flat as ever. "I'm just passing through, and I like to see how things move around here." "I understand. A man who cares about his safety. These days, you never know," Robert said, his smile friendly and genuine. He put down the shotgun and leaned on the counter. "Are you thinking of moving, or something?" "Maybe," John replied, his eyes fixed on a Remington 870 pump-action shotgun. "What kind of ammunition does your shop carry? Do you have anything for this?" "We have everything from birdshot to slugs, depending on what you need," Kendo explained proudly, but then his voice dropped as if he were sharing a secret. "Because of the rumors going around, people have been coming in to buy ammo to defend themselves. The truth is, the rumors don't bother me, but what does give me a bad feeling is what I've heard about the church in town. They say people have gone missing, and the police don't seem to be investigating. I've tried to ask around, but no one gives me any answers. It's a bad feeling." John continued examining the weapon, his fingers barely touching the wood, but his attention was completely focused on Kendo's words. "Disappearances, you say? What kind of disappearances?" "I don't know, the usual. People say they've seen ghosts," Robert replied with a shrug. "But I wonder if there's something more. One night, I saw the lights of a patrol car near the church, but they left in less than 5 minutes. Suddenly, a small girl of about 6 peeked out from a door in the back. Seeing John, she smiled and waved at him. John, surprised for a second, waved back. The girl ran to her father, who hugged her with affection. "Hi, Dad," the girl exclaimed. "The man waved at me. Is he a ghost hunter?" Robert laughed, and then turned back to John, his smile widening. "Sorry about that, this is my daughter, Natalia. A pleasure to meet you, sir." "John," he replied, his voice grave and concise. "A pleasure, John. I'm Robert Kendo," he said, extending his hand. John shook his hand with a firm grip. The girl, clinging to her father's leg, looked at John with curiosity. "Hi, Mr. John." John simply nodded in response. He took a moment to inspect the 9mm ammunition Robert had shown him, examined it with a silent professionalism, and bought 2 boxes. After paying, he said a brief, "Thank you," and walked out the door. Inside the shop, Natalia tugged at her father's pants. "Dad, did you see Mr. John's suit? It looked really expensive, like something a spy would wear in the movies." Robert smiled, stroking his daughter's head. "Yes, honey, a very elegant suit. And a very firm handshake." Natalia frowned, thinking, but why would a spy buy bullets at a small shop? It doesn't make sense. Robert chuckled. "Natalia, spies don't exist. They're just movies. Besides, a true professional knows not to underestimate a local gun shop. You never know what you might find." As the conversation faded in the distance, John walked through the streets of Raccoon City. The bag felt heavier now, not just because of the 2 boxes of ammunition, but because of the information he carried in his mind. 2 days of pure silence. The high table hadn't made a single move. That stillness felt more ominous than any assault. It was the calm before the storm, and one that had distracted him from the imminent danger he left behind. Or at least, that's what he had believed. Ghosts. Police looking the other way. John repeated to himself, his voice a whisper barely audible beneath the city's noise. This isn't my problem. My problem is the high table, not a church with a bad reputation. His logic, a lifetime of training, screamed at him to turn back, to return to his hotel, to keep a low profile and prepare for the inevitable. Exposing himself, drawing attention, it was the fastest way to break the agreement he had made with himself, that of a peaceful life. It's a mistake, he whispered. An unnecessary risk. If they see me here, if they link me to this, the trail will be easy to follow. But there was something else. Something he couldn't ignore. A small twitch in his instinct, the same one that had saved his life countless times. These weren't just random disappearances. They weren't just rumors. It was a problem the police didn't want to touch. And a problem the police ignore is often a problem that is too big for them, or one that hides something much deeper. The sun began to set, painting the sky a reddish-orange. In the distance, he saw the silhouette of the church Robert Kendo had mentioned. His thoughts refused to go, his reason resisted, but his feet, almost on their own, carried him in the opposite direction from the hotel. It was the same need that had led him to be who he was, a need to control his environment. He was on the threshold of a new war, his peace shattered by curiosity and the need to know. And in an instant, he found himself at the church entrance, his hands in his pockets, the hunter's instinct overwhelming the instinct for survival. Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Cross. The sun had set, and the silhouette of the church that Robert Kendo had mentioned loomed in the darkness, with an ominous quiet. John Wick didn't believe in the supernatural. Ghosts didn't exist, only souls with unfinished business. And his instinct, as sharp as a scalpel, told him that the unfinished business in this place was of another kind. He pushed the heavy wooden door and entered. The interior was not what he expected. Instead of the warmth of faith, there was a tense silence, a cold that stuck to the bones. The air, instead of smelling of incense, had a slight metallic aftertaste, of disinfectant. In the antechamber, a young blonde woman, about 20 years old, with a Bible in her hand, looked at him briefly and smiled with a forced kindness. "Good evening," she said, her voice soft and full of hope. "It's a very good church. Father Ben is a man of faith." "Good evening," John replied, his voice flat. He nodded, but his eyes remained impassive. He looked at her, analyzed her. She wasn't a victim, not yet. Just a parishioner. "Are you seeking redemption?" the girl asked. "Father Ben has a very big heart. He will guide you." "No, just a little information," John replied, in his usual voice. Suddenly, the young blonde took him by the arm and led him to a middle-aged man who was finishing talking to a parishioner. They approached the priest, a man in his 50s, with gray hair and a smile that seemed genuine, but didn't reach his eyes. "Father, I have found a new parishioner. You can tell he is looking for redemption and faith in God," the girl said, with a radiant smile. "My name is Sarah, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce him to you." The priest looked at John with a little surprise, then with a smile. "I am Father Ben. It is a pleasure to meet a new sheep in my flock. It's a special day for me, as after so much time, our sister Sarah will finally receive God's blessing." "It's a pleasure, Father Ben. My name is John. It's an honor to meet you," John replied. "I realize you have come to the right place," the priest said to him in a gentle voice. "What has brought you to our little church in Raccoon City?" John paused, feigning reflection. "I've been on a journey. Looking for peace. The tranquility of this place is different. True peace is found in repentance, in total surrender," Father Ben murmured, with an intense look. "You seem like a man who has seen a lot, who has lived in the shadows. Within these walls, you can find the light. The grace of God will give you a purpose, a new beginning." John nodded, his face inscrutable. "I've been thinking about it. The weight of my sins is heavy." The priest smiled. "Don't worry, our sister Sarah will receive a special blessing today. It is the first step on a road of no return. A path to redemption." John turned to Sarah. "And what time will that be?" John asked, with a touch of genuine forced curiosity in his voice. "In 15 minutes, the girl replied, with an even brighter smile. "I have to go now. God bless you." John nodded, watching her walk toward the main altar. For a moment, he stood in silence, observing Father Ben, who patted Sarah on the shoulder and then hugged her. John, in his internal thoughts, analyzed every gesture, every facial expression. The priest seemed to be a man of faith, but in his eyes there was something dark and manipulative. "He's a wolf in sheep's clothing," he said to himself. After John feigned a little more interest in religion, he said goodbye to Father Ben and casually left the church. Once outside, his movements became methodical, almost invisible. He crossed the street, his eyes moving quickly to scan every corner. He stopped in a narrow alley between two buildings, a dark and trash-filled place. It was perfect. From there, he could see the main church door, the side alley, and the movement of people in the street without being seen. It was an ideal place for a man who didn't want to be seen. With his breathing controlled and his heart beating at a constant rhythm, John stood there. He watched as Sarah and the priest walked toward the wall where a cross was. The priest pushed a candle, and the cross turned, revealing a door that opened into the basement. John watched as the girl and the priest went down. John's instinct, the same one that had saved his life countless times, screamed at him that something was wrong. He moved from his position, a shadow that blended with the night, and crossed the street. His feet made no sound as they stepped on the asphalt. He slid along the outer wall of the church, looking for a way to enter undetected. Every step was a calculation, every shadow a potential hiding place. Don't act recklessly, he told himself mentally. Just facts, no prejudice. He approached a side window, hidden by a vine. It was high enough to be inaccessible to most, but not to him. With an agile and silent movement, he climbed up. Once on the roof, he slid along the tiles, looking for an entrance. His eyes, accustomed to the dark, scanned every crack, every opening, until he found a skylight at the top. It was covered in dust and grime, but through it, he could see a flash of light. John slid a small knife along the skylight's frame, carefully lifting it. The sound of a slight creak was the only thing that gave away his presence. He slid through the opening, falling gently onto a ledge inside. The air was dense and stagnant. He was in the upper part of the main nave, hidden among the wooden beams. His gaze turned to the cross on the altar. The cross was no longer on the wall, but had been turned, revealing a door that had closed. His mind, trained not to act on prejudice, looked for a pattern. A pattern that did not fit with redemption and faith. John was not a man of faith, but he knew a deception when he saw one. And this was a well-staged deception. He slid along the beams to the altar, moving with the grace of a ghost. He stopped at the stone wall. He saw a small indentation in the wall, which revealed a mechanism. His eyes went to the candelabra. He carefully pushed it, mimicking the priest's gesture. The cross turned, but instead of opening like a door, it flipped down, revealing a spiral staircase that descended into the darkness. So this is the gate to paradise, John thought, in a rare moment of dark humor. A cross that turns upside down to reveal a stairway to hell. Very biblical, Father. Without losing a second, John began to descend the spiral staircase. His movements were a symphony of speed and silence. The stone steps were cold and covered in dust, but his bare feet, with his special footwear, adhered to them without making the slightest noise. With each step, his mind became more and more focused on the environment. The air became denser, and a smell of chemicals grew stronger. The voices of Father Ben and Sarah, which became clearer with each step down, became more unsettling. The priest's voice was soft and mellow. Sarah's, full of hope. "What do you think you're doing, Father?" John said to himself. The girl's voice, which had been full of hope, now sounded anxious and scared. "Father, what is that? You promised me a blessing, not this," she complained. "The process is painful, but the reward is eternal," the priest said, his voice now harsh and cold. "Don't worry, soon you will be a very valuable asset to the company." John heard a moan and the girl exclaimed, "Ah, what have you put in me? I feel dizzy." "I told you it would be a small prick," the priest replied with a cruel smile. "Don't worry, this is just the beginning." John knew that the conversation didn't give him all the details of the situation. His mind, cold and clear, remained focused on the facts. He listened to the audio, but his mind did not let itself be carried away by panic or emotion. His training had taught him to trust only what his eyes saw. The sound of a groan, of an exclamation, of a priest who spoke of valuable assets and company was not enough for him to act. He was a man of facts, not assumptions. He moved in silence, descending the last steps. With his hand in his pocket, ready to draw his weapon, he approached the basement door. He opened it carefully, just enough for his eye to see what was happening. The scene was even darker than he had imagined. The basement was a nightmarish place, with metal cells and gurneys. Sarah was on one of them, unconscious. The priest, his face stripped of its kindness, was surrounded by a group of scientists. But that wasn't all. John mentally counted the people in the room: 4 scientists in white coats, the father, and 5 guards with advanced military equipment. John recognized the logo on the uniforms. The Umbrella Company, a pharmaceutical corporation that, for some reason, was doing dirty business in a church. John Wick's mind worked with the coldness of a computer. There was no time for shock. His training and instincts told him he had to act. Slowly, he took out his pistol with the extended magazine, checked it, and attached a silencer. His mind was already calculating the order of elimination. The armed guards were the first threat. Then the scientists, who could be a secondary threat. The priest, the origin of all this, would be kept alive. Without a second of doubt or warning, John opened the door completely. The first shot went straight to the head of the closest guard. The muffled sound of the shot was barely a whisper. John moved like lightning, shooting with millimeter precision. The first 4 guards fell immediately, with a bullet in the head and without a single groan. The 5th guard, who was farther away, felt the gust of air from a companion who fell to the ground for no reason. A survival instinct made him turn, and just in time he saw the barrel of John Wick's gun pointing at him. He fired his assault rifle in John's direction, who quickly raised his suit jacket to cover himself. The bullets pierced the fabric in the Kevlar vest he wore underneath, causing some bullets to ricochet. The sound of the assault rifle shots broke the silence of the room. John, taking advantage of the moment of confusion, took cover behind one of the metal gurneys. The guard, thinking he had a moment's respite, desperately sought cover. But it was a fatal mistake. John didn't give him a second. He came out of his cover with inhuman speed. The guard reacted too late. He raised his rifle, but his skull was pierced by a bullet. With the 5 guards eliminated, the priest and the scientists were in a state of complete shock. John stood, his gun smoking and his gaze cold. John Wick did not hesitate. There was no warning, no negotiation. Simply the execution of the plan. The scientists, seeing the massacre, fell to their knees. "Please, no," one cried. "I have a family, we don't know anything, we just do what we're told." Another begged. John didn't listen. His ears were trained to ignore pleas. He reloaded his gun with an eerie coldness. With the priest still in shock, John approached the 4 scientists and shot them without mercy, one by one. The silence of the room, broken only by the whispers of the silenced pistol, was a reminder of what John Wick was capable of. As the bodies of the guards and scientists lay on the floor, John Wick examined them with a meticulous gaze. He noticed a couple of convulsive movements, the last gasps of life. With the same calm with which he had arrived, he raised his pistol and, without a single hesitation, fired 2 more times. The bullets, precise and silent, impacted directly on the skulls of those who were still moving. His breathing remained constant, his pulse undisturbed. It was a routine, a habit of a man who left nothing to chance. Father Ben, who had been on his knees, with trembling hands, mumbling an incomprehensible prayer, fell silent at the sight of John's coldness. The priest's eyes opened wide, and the voice that used to be soft and mellow was gone. Now, there was only a deafening silence. John approached Father Ben, who was still kneeling, with a lost look and trembling hands. John said nothing. He crouched down, took a new magazine from his pocket, and inserted it into his pistol. The metallic click echoed in the silent room. "What is Umbrella?" John asked, in his same flat, cold voice. The priest shook his head, whispering, "I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about." John, with the patience of a machine, aimed at the priest's knee. The silenced bullet hit with a dull thud. Father Ben's scream was cut short by an indescribable groan of pain. The knee dislocated, the kneecap fractured, and the bone broke completely. Blood splattered across the floor. "Lord Spencer, grant us strength," Father Ben mumbled. John moved to the other side, aiming at his elbow. The priest, with his eyes full of tears, closed his eyes tightly. Another shot, the elbow shattered, and the arm bent at an unnatural angle, dripping blood onto the priest's clothes. Father Ben fell to the floor, his body writhing in agony. "I'm not asking, I'm telling you to tell me." John's voice was a deadly whisper. The priest shook his head, his mouth full of blood. John became frustrated. He knelt, took the priest's collar, and lifted him up. Father Ben's face was swollen from the pain, but his eyes, despite the terror, showed a strange determination. John was about to end his life. The great John Wick," the priest said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The feared Baba Yaga, I didn't expect a ghost hunted by the high table to end my life." John stopped. His eyes, which were always cold and empty, widened a little. The priest knew him. How was that possible? The priest smiled, a macabre, blood-filled smile. Don't worry, the priest continued, whispering with a coldness that rivaled John's. Umbrella won't stand by idly. They'll come looking for you. They'll take care of you. And they won't care about the high table. John responded without fear, his voice a silent thunder. They should try. I'll come for everyone who comes. I'll kill everyone who comes near me. I'll kill them all. The priest started to laugh, a dry, terrifying sound. Do you think Umbrella will send assassins to kill the legendary Baba Yaga? You're wrong. It will be much worse than that. Without saying anything else, John Wick shot him in the head. Father Ben's skull shattered, scattering blood and brains across the floor. The lifeless body fell to the ground, no longer groaning, no longer whispering, no longer laughing. There was only silence. Author's note: this John Wick is much younger than the original, around 24 years old. Everything will follow the canon of the films, only that John will be younger and set in late September 1998 when everything happens in Resident Evil 2 and 3. And by the way, since this John Wick is much younger, he will not have met his wife like in the films. Chapter 3, Revelations, September 24th, Raccoon City, church basement. The echo of the last silenced shot dissipated in the dense, metallic air of the basement. The inert body of Father Ben lay on the floor, a dark stain on the gray cement. John Wick stood still for a moment, his breathing constant, his pulse undisturbed. There was no hurry. The job was done. The first thing he did was the ritual. He took a folded and clean cloth from his inside pocket and began to meticulously clean his pistol. It wasn't just about the grime. It was an act of purification, of closing a cycle. The blood and brains of Father Ben were wiped from the grip, and the steel regained its cold shine. Every movement was fluid, like a dance of shadows. John checked every part of the weapon, disassembled it, and reassembled it with inhuman speed. It was his form of meditation. While he worked, his gaze fell on Sarah, the girl who was unconscious on the metal gurney. Her face, covered by a dirty sheet, was the only trace of innocence in that nightmarish place. John finished cleaning his weapon and approached the metal cell where she was. The door had a reinforced lock. He took out his pistol, aimed precisely at the lock, and fired 3 times. The sound was 3 whispers, and the lock was shattered. The metal door opened with a screech, revealing the girl's pale and sweaty face. John leaned over her. His touch, which was usually a tool of destruction, became soft and careful. Despite years of killing and the distance he had put between himself and human emotion, the sight of the helpless girl moved him. He wondered how many other victims had passed through this place, and his gaze shifted to the other cells. He saw 10 of them, all empty. Fear invaded him. Where were they? Had they been taken away? Or was Father Ben right and things were going to be much worse? He was a man based on logic and facts, and the idea that Umbrella was doing something so cruel without reason infuriated him. John gently shook her shoulder. Hey, wake up. There was no response. He tried again, with more force. Get up, you can't stay here. But she didn't move. John stopped, his mind already searching for a solution. His instinct told him that the answer was not in brute force, but in information. He went to the scientist's desk. There were computers, papers, test tubes, and flasks with strange liquids. The smell of chemicals was overwhelming. John, with his analytical and methodical mind, sat down in front of one of the computers. It was locked. But for a man like him, the concept of locked was just a challenge. With a series of clicks and commands, he accessed the files. The first thing he saw was an untitled audio file. He opened it. Lord Spencer, grant us strength, was the voice of Father Ben in his last breath. The audio was a reminder that the truth was not in what the priest had told him, but in what he had hidden. John saw several files with strange names: Project G, Project T, Progenitor. But what really caught his attention was a folder called Test Subjects. With his hand trembling for the first time in years, John opened the folder. There were dozens of files of missing people from Raccoon City, each with a photo and a detailed report of their progress. But what really made him shudder were the video recordings. The videos showed the test subjects transforming into violent, mindless creatures. John, a man who had seen the worst atrocities in the world, couldn't help but be surprised. The creatures had pale and putrefied skin, their eyes were milky white, and their bodies writhed in agony. At first, He thought it was a very bad joke, a trick to scare him. He had seen men go crazy and do horrible things, but what he was seeing on the screen was not human. A guttural moan, a crunch of bones, and then the test subject, a middle-aged man, got up with a skeletal and putrefied look. His limbs were twisting at impossible angles. "Damn it," John whispered to himself, his voice a grave murmur. Never in his life, neither in the wars of his past nor in the worst jobs of the high table, had he seen something so grotesque. What he had in front of him made no sense. It was not a killer, it was not a killing machine. It was a monster. And there were 10 empty cells. Which meant there were 10 of those things somewhere, ready to be released. In one of the recordings, a scientist said, with a cheerful voice, "It is a blessing, Father. The virus is the key to creating biological weapons that will dominate the world. Father Ben had the mission of getting us the test subjects. One day, with the power of Lord Spencer, Umbrella Corporation will make this world its playground. Don't worry about the high table, it no longer matters. John Wick, the Baba Yaga, is on the run, and we are here, in the church that no one wants to see, creating something that will end everything the high table protects." John turned off the video, feeling a mixture of frustration and disgust. The priest knew his past, but never told him the truth. And now, a pharmaceutical corporation called Umbrella was using terror to create a hell on earth. And he, a man who only wanted peace, was in the center of it all. His gaze returned to Sarah. His heart, which beat with the constancy of a predator, now felt a pang of indecision. "What do I do with you, girl?" he asked himself, his voice barely audible. There were 2 options, and both were bad. He could leave her. It was the logical option, the one his training dictated. She was a loose end, an uncontrollable variable. A body in the trunk of a car, a trace he couldn't erase. But his conscience, that hunter's instinct that had brought him here, whispered something else to him. A man of peace does not let an innocent girl be a victim of an experiment. A man of peace does not allow a group of scientists to play God. John knelt beside the gurney. He put 2 fingers on her neck, looking for her pulse. It was weak, but steady. That meant she was still alive. And that the virus had not acted. Yet, or had it, was she in the process of becoming? The images from the videos came to his mind. The body contorting, the skin turning pale. What if she woke up that way? Would he have to kill her? He didn't know, and not knowing was the hardest part of his dilemma. The second option was to take her. It was the noblest, but the most dangerous. His car had been left in a warehouse in New York, abandoned so as not to leave a trace. The only way to get her out of here was in a vehicle, and stealing a car was the fastest way to attract attention. The night was advanced, but the city was not completely asleep. A man, with an unconscious girl in his arms, would not go unnoticed. The police, the high table, and now Umbrella. Everyone would be looking for him. What if he took her to a hospital? What if he called an ambulance? It would be crazy. It would be the same as giving his location to the enemies. His mind, so used to solving problems, was in a dead end. The most sensible thing was to leave her, but his morals, the little honor he had left, told him not to. He was at a crossroads. The peace he had sought had been shattered into 1,000 pieces, and now he was not just the hunter, he was the protector of someone he didn't even know. And the only question he asked himself was, is it still worth fighting for peace? A third option came to his mind, and that was to stay. To stay in the basement until she woke up. He had the necessary resources to wait. He had food in his backpack, and water. He had weapons to defend himself. But what if she didn't wake up for days? What if the 10 missing test subjects came looking for them? Father Ben had told the girl that the path to redemption had no return, and that sounded to him like the blessing was something permanent. John couldn't afford to stay there. It was a stupid, reckless move. It would be like putting a sign on the door that said, "I'm here, come and get me." After a long moment of reflection, the answer came to his mind with the clarity of a blow. None of the options were perfect, but one was the least bad. He couldn't steal a car. He couldn't wait, but he could be invisible. He could use the rules of ordinary people to hide in plain sight. He got up, carefully took the girl in his arms, and headed for the basement exit, closing the door behind him. In his arms, the girl looked like a rag doll, light and fragile. He climbed the stairs with a deadly silence. Once outside, the coolness of the night greeted him. The street was deserted, except for a few flickering streetlights. John moved through the shadows, carrying the girl as if she were a bundle. He walked away from the church, from the crime scene. He walked about 3 blocks, enough so that the church was not visible. He took his phone out of his pocket, dialed a number, and put it to his ear. He pretended to be talking to someone, laughed, and then said, "Yes, I need a taxi. I'm on Main Street, about 3 blocks from the church." John waited on the sidewalk, with the girl in his arms, waiting patiently. A few minutes later, a yellow taxi stopped in front of him. The driver looked at him with curiosity. John smiled, a smile as fake as young Sarah's in the church, and said, "My friend had a little too much fun. Don't worry, I won't give you any trouble." The taxi driver looked at him with suspicion, but John took out a wad of bills and said, "I'll give you double the fare. Just take me to the Grand Hotel in Raccoon City." The taxi driver accepted, and John got into the taxi, leaving the church, the bodies, and the hell he had just discovered behind. As the taxi drove away from the church, John Wick rested his head against the window, watching the streetlights pass by as blurs. His mind, which never stopped, began to professionally analyze the situation. He had left no trace. His black leather gloves, a habit from his years of work, made sure there were no fingerprints. The bullets were his own fabrication, impossible to trace. He had cleaned the weapon, and the trace of gunpowder had already disappeared. He was a ghost in motion. But he knew it wasn't that simple. Father Ben knew him. Not only did he know the Baba Yaga, but he also knew his connection to the high table. And what's more, Umbrella knew of his existence. "They won't care about the high table," the priest had said. That was what worried him most. It was not a hunt for a high table assassin, it was something different, something bigger. John had always trusted his instinct, and his instinct told him it would not be easy to escape from Umbrella. Father Ben was not afraid of him, but rather it was he who was afraid for John. "And they won't care about the high table," he repeated to himself. He said it to himself, as a way of understanding the magnitude of the problem. The high table had rules. It had a code of conduct. But Umbrella, a pharmaceutical company, had no rules. They were unpredictable, and that was the most dangerous thing. He was a man of rules, of codes. And now he was in a world where the code didn't exist, a world of monsters and experimentation. The taxi stopped in front of the hotel. John got out with the girl in his arms and headed for the entrance. The receptionist, a man with glasses and an impeccable suit, looked at him with curiosity. "Good evening, sir. Your friend seems to have had a very lively night." John gave him one of his fake smiles and took a stack of bills from his pocket. "Yes," he said, in a low voice. "A very lively night. Would you be so kind as to forget about tonight? What happened here, what you saw, is none of your business. And I guarantee you, sir, that silence has a price." The receptionist looked at the money and nodded. John went up to his room, and in his arms, Sarah was still unconscious. Once inside the room, John carefully placed Sarah on the bed. His eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of danger or listening devices, but he found nothing. He had a sixth sense for these things, a sixth sense that had saved him more than once. He knelt beside the bed, looking at Sarah. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was slow and shallow. He didn't know if the virus had already spread through her body or not. He had no way of knowing. As a precaution, and also for safety, he took a thin but very strong rope from his backpack. With a quick and methodical movement, he tied Sarah's hands to the bed rails and her feet to the legs of the bed. Once he made sure she couldn't move, he stood up, and a small smile formed on his lips. The situation was ridiculous. The scene looked like something out of a horror movie. He, the legendary assassin, a man who hadn't seen a woman in months, was tying an unconscious girl to a bed. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed by him. He imagined someone entering the room and seeing him in this situation. A moment of amusement in a life full of pain. His mind told him that the image would be that of a pervert, a depraved man, but his logic, screamed at him that it was a necessary act. For the girl and for him. A laugh escaped him, a dry and bitter sound that dissolved into the silence of the room. John, having finished securing Sarah, went to the room door. He took a small piece of metal and a pistol with a silencer from his pocket. With a quick movement, he hooked it to the top of the door. Then, with a thin metal wire, he connected it to the pistol so that when the door opened, the wire would tighten, and the pistol would fire automatically. A trap, a simple but very effective trap. It was almost impossible for a stranger to enter the room without getting shot. Finally, with the girl tied up and the room secured, he went to the bathroom. He took a quick shower and put on his silk robe. Then, he sat in a chair, put a bullet in the magazine of the pistol he had in his hand, and left it on the table next to the bed. The night would be long. He took off his suit, stained with blood and dust, and put it in a plastic bag to then put it in the hotel washing machine. He couldn't leave a trace of his location. He sat in the chair, which gave him a complete view of the room. From the 2 windows facing the street, the entrance door, to the bed where Sarah lay, tied and unconscious. The pistol with the bullet in the magazine was on the nightstand, within his reach. He had no intention of sleeping. A dream for him was an unnecessary risk. He closed his eyes for an instant, not to rest, but to meditate. He was in a chess game, and his life, and Sarah's, were the pieces. One wrong move and everything would be over. The long night of waiting began. The morning sun crept through the curtains, a yellow flash that crossed the room. John Wick had not moved. The night had passed without incident, a tense silence that was almost more exhausting than a shootout. The trap on the door was still intact, the pistol on the nightstand was still where he had left it. And Sarah was still asleep, tied to the bed, a silent enigma in the midst of the chaos he had unleashed. John got up from the chair. There were no signs of tiredness on his face. His body, a perfectly tuned machine, was used to sleep deprivation. His routine was unbreakable, a discipline forged over years of work. First, the exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, stretches. He didn't need a gym. His own weight was enough. Every movement was fluid, controlled, a constant reminder that his body was his most lethal weapon. There was no room for flabbiness or weakness. After the exercise, a quick shower. It wasn't to relax, but to refresh himself, to wash away the traces of the night before. He came out of the bathroom and put on a dark gray V-neck shirt, black denim pants, and sports sneakers. It was casual wear, but even so, a layer of Kevlar was under the shirt, a reminder that peace was only an illusion. Then he went to the kitchenette. He turned on the coffee maker and prepared a quick breakfast, a bowl of cereal with milk and a black coffee without sugar. He ate standing up, his gaze fixed on Sarah. His mind, a living archive, began to catalog her. Name, Sarah. Approximate age, 20 years old. Hair, blonde, long. Skin, pale, with some freckles. Build, thin, but with developed musculature. A person who was in shape, not sedentary. Current status, unconscious, with a mark of a small prick on her arm. John was not a man of emotions, but cataloging was his way of understanding. It was a way of making an enigma a problem he could solve. As he ate, his gaze fell on Sarah, and for a second, the image from the church video was superimposed in his mind. The body writhing, the pale skin, the white eyes. Was Sarah one of those test subjects? Or was she just another victim? Father Ben hadn't answered, but uncertainty was a luxury John couldn't afford. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't let his guard down. He couldn't leave anything to chance. A bite and a sip of coffee, and the routine continued its course. The night had been long, but the day promised to be even longer. John finished his breakfast. With the same efficiency with which he had done everything, he left his bowl and cup in the sink and went to his backpack. His routine did not end with food. It was a constant process of preparation and review. He opened the backpack and took out his arsenal, each weapon with a purpose, each bullet with a destination. He checked his magazines, counted the bullets, checked the silencer, the firearm, the combat knives, the grenades. It wasn't a game, it was a routine that had saved his life countless times. His mind reviewed every detail, every possibility. A count of his weapon supply. Once he finished, he put everything back in his backpack. It was at that moment that he heard a sound, a barely audible moan. A sound that did not come from the street or another room. It came from the bed. John's heart, which had remained calm all night, gave a small jump. It was a mixture of fear and relief. Fear because the girl could wake up as one of the monsters he had seen in the video, and relief because the mystery that had tormented him all night was about to be solved. John moved with a deadly silence. His hand, firm and without shaking, slid to his waist. With a fluid movement, he took out his pistol with a silencer. It was an instinct, an automatic response to a possible danger. His mind, however, was racing at 1,000 miles per hour. What if the bullets are not enough? He wondered. The image of the monsters from the video was superimposed in his mind. They were resistant. A normal bullet would not take them down. Uncertainty gnawed at him. John slowly approached the bed, each step a whisper. His eyes, cold and penetrating, fell on Sarah. The girl wasn't moving much. She just moaned. Her breathing was slow and shallow. She didn't look like a monster, she didn't have pale and putrefied skin, she didn't have white eyes. But John didn't lower his guard. The video had taught him that the change could be sudden. He stopped about 2 meters from the bed, a safe distance, but close enough to act if necessary. Sarah moved again. This time, her eyes opened, her pupils dilated with fear. She looked at herself, saw that she was tied up, and her eyes opened even wider. No. Where am I? What happened? She murmured, her voice trembling. Suddenly, her gaze fixed on John. You were in the church. What? Then, a scream of panic escaped her. Father Ben, he. Calm down, John said, his voice firm and flat. I'm John, you're safe. Father Ben is no longer here. Sarah looked at him with eyes full of fear. The scene, a man with a pistol in his hand, and her, tied to a bed, was out of a horror movie. You kidnapped me, she screamed. Get me out of here, please. Don't hurt me. John didn't move, he didn't lower his guard. He didn't get closer. I didn't kidnap you, I saved your life, he replied, in the same tone. Father Ben was going to do something much worse to you than you can imagine. Now, calm down and listen. Chapter 4, The Echo of Umbrella. September 25th, Raccoon City. Inside the hotel. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, a yellow glint cutting across the room. John Wick hadn't moved from the chair. He had watched all night, his senses sharpened by the presence of Sarah, who remained tied to the bed. The escape plan and the morning ritual had kept him busy. But now, with a steaming coffee in hand and the silence of the room, the reality of his situation settled with the weight of a concrete slab. The girl stirred in bed, groaning, and her eyes opened, filled with terror and confusion. No. Where am I? What happened? She murmured, her voice trembling. She looked at herself, saw she was tied up, and her eyes widened even further. You kidnapped me, she cried. Get me out of here, please. Don't hurt me. John remained impassive, his voice was firm, devoid of emotion. I didn't kidnap you, I saved your life. Father Ben was going to do something much worse to you than you can imagine. Now, calm down and listen. Sarah's gaze filled with fear. The scene, a man with a gun in his hand and her tied to a bed, was out of a horror movie. You're a monster, she exclaimed. I'm not a monster, John replied, in his usual voice. I'm a man trying to live in peace. The monster is outside these walls, and Father Ben was part of it. Now, tell me, what did he do to you? He gave me the blessing, Sarah said, her words choked by fear. He told me it was a gift from God, that it would make me a better person. He led me to the altar, and injected me with something. John nodded, his face expressionless. The virus. A biological weapon. Father Ben was using you for a corporation called Umbrella. Umbrella, what? What is that? And the virus, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about that, Sarah said, her voice full of panic. And Father Ben, he was a good man. He said everyone who received the blessing was sent to other churches to follow God's teachings. He wouldn't do anything wrong. Please, let me go. What do you think I am? One of those things you saw. John looked at her, his mind processing every word. The truth Sarah had told him, that she didn't know what was happening, was evident in her voice, in her eyes. But John's instinct, the one that had saved his life countless times, screamed at him not to trust her. The videos he had seen had taught him that the transformation was sudden, but he couldn't risk there being some other symptom he didn't know about, and by releasing her, he might make a fatal mistake. I don't know, John replied, in a tone that left her no doubt he was telling the truth. I don't know if you'll turn into one of those things, or if the virus is already in you. The ones I saw in the video, their skin turned pale and their eyes turned white, and you're not like that. Then why do you have me tied up? Sarah asked, with growing desperation in her voice. Because I don't know if there's a symptom I'm unaware of and I'll make a mistake by trusting you. And a mistake in this case is fatal, John replied, his voice flat and emotionless. Besides, Father Ben said he had given you a blessing. The one I saw was not a blessing, it was a curse. I saw people writhing in pain, turning into monsters. I saw a person turn into a mindless thing, a thing that only wants blood and human flesh. No. That's impossible, Sarah whispered, her eyes filled with tears. It's not. I saw it with my own eyes, John replied. That's why I need to know if Father Ben injected them with anything else. If the virus is only one part, I'm not sure you're different. I can't take the risk. I have to know what they injected you with. He didn't tell me. I don't know, Sarah said, sobbing. The idea that it was just a sedative resonated with John. It made sense. It was logical. If she had been infected immediately, she would have already transformed. The hypothesis that it was a sedative for transport made sense. His assassin's mind, so accustomed to strategies in clandestine operations, understood the reasoning. It was a logical plan. John stood up, his face expressionless. Good. I'll untie your hands, he said, his voice a silent thunder. But not from the bed. I'll tie you to the chair. Sarah, resigned, nodded. Yes, please. John approached, untied her from the bed, and sat her in a chair. He tied her to the chair and untied her hands. John served her the bowl of cereal she hadn't eaten that morning and gave it to her. Take it, eat, he ordered. Sarah ate hastily, glancing at him sideways. For a moment, there was an awkward silence, a silence heavier than any explosion. And then, Sarah spoke. Thank you, for saving me from there, Sarah said, her words barely a whisper. I don't know who you are, or what you are, but you saved me. And I'm sure you're not a monster. John looked at her for a long moment, with the same cold expression. He sat in the chair opposite her and watched her finish eating. Hours passed. John didn't move from the chair. His gaze remained fixed on Sarah, analyzing every millimeter of her skin, looking for any change, any symptom, any sign. His instinct told him not to trust her, but his logic, based on what he had seen in the videos, told him that Sarah was a victim. Uncertainty was a luxury he couldn't afford. As time passed, John's questions became more specific. Tell me about the church, he said. Sarah, now calmer, told him she lived there. Her family had died in a car accident years ago, and Father Ben had taken her under his care. The church was her home, her refuge. She had nowhere to go. The idea that Father Ben had betrayed her, the person she trusted most, made her tremble. You have nowhere to go. You have no one in this city to protect you, John said, his voice flat and emotionless. And I can't let you go. You know who I am, you know what I look like. You know which hotel I'm staying in. I can't leave loose ends. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, nodded. I understand. Do what you have to do. If you have to kill me, do it. I've lost my family, I've lost my faith, I've lost everything. John looked at her, his assassin's mind at war with his conscience. His instinct told him to kill her, but his conscience told him he couldn't do it. She was innocent. She was a victim. But how much could he risk? After a long moment of reflection, the answer came to his mind with the same clarity as a blow. There was a third option. He wouldn't kill her, but he wouldn't let her go. I'm not going to kill you, John said, his voice a silent thunder. But you have to follow me. I will become your protector. You have to follow my rules. You won't ask questions, you won't talk to anyone, you won't stray from me. If you do, you'll be a loose end. And a loose end, in my world, gets cut. Sarah nodded, her voice a whisper. Yes, I understand. I'll follow you. I'll thank you for the rest of my life. Don't thank me, John said, his voice a deep whisper. Gratitude is a luxury we cannot afford. Now, listen to me. The Raccoon City police are probably already investigating the church. If they see you like this, they'll interrogate you. You have to go unnoticed. John opened his suitcase and gave her a pair of denim pants, a casual shirt, and sneakers. Go to the bathroom, shower and change. Don't wear anything you used to wear. Erase all traces of your past. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, took the clothes and went to the bathroom. John watched her go, his mind returning to the conversation he had had with Father Ben. His words still echoed in his head, Umbrella won't stand by. They will look for you, they won't care about the high table, it will be much worse than that. John's old hunter instinct told him the priest was telling the truth. The mere sound of the word had been enough to scare him. John knew he had discovered something much bigger than the high table. Something that would make him stop being the hunter and turn him into the hunted. And he wasn't going to run. While Sarah showered, John changed his suit for a casual shirt and a cap. He put his pistol in his pants. He was ready for war. He was ready for whatever came. When Sarah came out of the bathroom, his heart beat a little faster. Her hair, now clean, fell over her shoulders. The casual shirt was a little big on her, but it gave her a touch of beauty and simplicity that she didn't have in her church clothes. John could barely recognize her. She looked like a normal college girl, not a victim. The change was amazing, and John, who was not a man of emotions, realized that he had saved her from more than just the virus. He had saved her from a life of deception and lies. "I'm ready," Sarah said, with a small smile on her face. "Thank you, John." John didn't answer. He just looked at her with a slight smile. He gave her one last look, the look of a man about to face war. Together, they headed to the reception. The receptionist, the same one who had seen them enter, looked at them with a mocking smile. Young people these days, they went out at night, and they come back in the morning. "Did you have a good night?" John ignored him. His gaze remained cold and flat. "We're going out," he said, his voice a deadly whisper. The receptionist nodded, his smile faded, and in an instant, he understood that he was not talking to a normal man, but to someone who had a purpose. John left the hotel with Sarah by his side, his instincts on high alert. He walked a few blocks down the main street of Raccoon City. He entered an electronics store, and with a wad of bills, he bought a disposable phone, one of those old ones, with buttons and no touch screen. It was a precaution. A digital trail is a fingerprint. And John Wick never left fingerprints. He stopped in an alley, out of sight of the cameras. He dialed the number. The phone rang only once before being answered. "Winston," John said, his voice low and deep. "John," replied the familiar voice on the other end of the line. It was Winston, the manager of the New York Continental, the man who had shot him, the man who had left him for dead. "I didn't expect my ghost to call me. I'm surprised you're not seeking revenge. It's not the time. The Bowery King gave me a place to hide, a place to heal. He gave me a message to deliver." "The High Table still thinks you're dead," Winston said, his voice a whisper. "What happened on the roof? It was necessary, John. A demonstration. The High Table suspects nothing. Months have passed. The waters have calmed. Now that you know, what will you do? Are you going to seek peace again?" "I tried," John replied, with a heavy sigh. "I came to Raccoon City to find refuge. But it seems the world doesn't want me to stay still." There was a silence. "There is no peace for us, John. Only the next job." "I've discovered something, Winston. A corporation, one called Umbrella." The silence on the other end of the line was deep, heavy, and chilling. John, with his hunter's instinct, knew he had struck a nerve. The seconds dragged on, and the silence became increasingly menacing. Finally, Winston spoke, his voice no longer that of an old friend. It was that of a man who was afraid of what was on the other end of the phone. "Hang up, John. Don't ask any more questions. Don't mess with them. Not even the High Table dares to mess with Umbrella. Not even the Russians." "What are you talking about, Winston? Who are they?" John asked. "They are a force of nature. They are an earthquake. If you got into trouble with them, there's only one thing you can do, John," Winston said, his voice a whispered warning. "Run." And then, the click. The call was cut off. John was left with the phone in his hand, a feeling of unease creeping over his skin. Winston, the man who feared nothing, feared Umbrella. The mere sound of the word had been enough to scare him. John knew he had discovered something much bigger than the High Table. Something that would make him stop being the hunter and turn him into the hunted. And he wasn't going to run. He threw the phone in the trash can and set off. It was time to go back to Sarah. John headed to the electronics store where he had left her. He stopped at the door, with a hand on the knob. He looked through the display window, and his heart sank. The inside of the store was full of rough-looking, military-looking guys, their hands in their pockets and their eyes fixed on Sarah, who was at the back of the store. John sighed, his mind returning to the conversation with Father Ben. Father Ben had told him that Umbrella would send people. John, with an expressionless look, entered the store, his hunter's instinct telling him he was getting into trouble. "Sarah," he said, his voice flat and emotionless, like a greeting from a normal acquaintance. Sarah, who had been feeling trapped, heard her name and felt relieved. She was about to call out to him, but John made a quick gesture with his head, an imperceptible signal that made her quiet down. Sarah understood immediately. It was an order. She held back, and instead of going to him, she cooperated with the men who surrounded her. "She's the only one alive," said one, in a deep voice. "Umbrella wants to know how the hell she got out of there without a scratch. It's practically impossible for a girl so innocent to have killed so many guards and scientists." Maybe they infected her and are using her as bait, said another, his voice full of mockery. She's not infected, said the leader of the group, a tall man, with scars on his face and a cold gaze. The virus blood in her veins is not active. Someone must have killed it all. We want to know who it is. If she doesn't tell us, we'll find out our way. The men moved, dragging Sarah by the arm. Let's go to the alley. No witnesses, the leader said. John, who had entered the store like any other shopper, followed them at a safe distance. His eyes scanned the street, looking for anything that could give him away. His instincts told him to stay hidden. He was about to face Umbrella's professionals. Their conversation was a source of information he needed. The leader of the group, who was dragging Sarah by the arm, interrogated her. What happened? Who killed all those people? Who helped you? The group leader asked her. Sarah, who had already resigned herself to her fate, replied in a trembling voice, I don't know. I was unconscious. Don't lie, said the leader, his voice full of fury. You were the only one there. You have to know something. No, I don't know anything, Sarah said, her voice a whisper. The group reached the alley. It was dark and full of garbage. The perfect place for a man who didn't want to leave witnesses. The men threw Sarah to the ground, and she cowered, expecting the worst. The group leader approached dangerously, his eyes fixed on her, with a malicious look. Last chance, doll, he said, his voice a deadly whisper. Tell me who saved you, and maybe I'll let you go. Otherwise, I'm going to have to find the information myself. As the leader approached Sarah, John, at the alley entrance, was a little relieved. He could capture one of these guys and extract all the information about Umbrella. It was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. John pulled out his silenced pistol, his hand remaining firm and steady. He aimed at the heads of the men behind Sarah. There was no need for mercy. They were Umbrella agents, mercenaries of a corporation that killed people for money. They were the enemy. They were also assassins, but they were not part of the High Table's rules. John fired 4 times in rapid succession. By the time the first body fell, the others were already being riddled with a bullet to the head. The only one left was the leader, who turned around when he heard the sound of the bodies hitting the floor. As he was about to draw his weapon, a bullet struck his hand, making his weapon fly off and his hand bleed. The man, with the pain in his hand and blood gushing, pulled out a knife, while John put away his pistol and slowly approached, letting himself be seen. When the man recognized John, he was astonished, his eyes wide, and his body began to tremble a little. John Wick, he whispered. Baba Yaga, what are you doing here? Why are you attacking Umbrella? Then, the man's mind clicked. A dry laugh escaped him. So John Wick is going to face Umbrella for a woman, huh? You'll regret this. We're going to hunt you down. John ignored him. He approached dangerously, his hands in leather gloves. With each step he took, the man with the knife trembled more and more. The man, knowing he had no chance of winning, lunged in a desperate attack. The blade of the knife gleamed in the dimness of the alley, a flash meant to be quick and lethal. In his mind, the man thought, I can't win, but I can leave a scar on the legend. I can wound the Baba Yaga. Adrenaline, pain, and desperation mixed in his mind, and he attacked. But John was not a man, he was a force of nature. His movement was so fast that it seemed the man had missed him for a second. The man felt the wind of a punch that passed by his face, and John's kick struck his hand with pinpoint accuracy. The man felt the impact, a pain that made him scream. He could feel the crunch of his finger bones as the knife fell to the floor. John, without missing a beat, and with the same fluid motion, struck his neck with the side of his hand, a blow to knock him out. The man, already overwhelmed by pain, collapsed to the ground, unconscious. John needed him alive to extract information. Chapter 5. The Worm in the Apple. September 25th. Raccoon City. The Alley. 12 p.m. The echo of silenced gunshots faded into the dense alley air. The bodies of the Umbrella agents lay lifeless on the ground, like puppets without strings. John Wick, with his leather gloves and expressionless gaze, did not stand still. His instinct told him every second counted. His mind, a constantly operating threat processor, had already shifted from action to planning. The first thing he did was a quick scan of the surroundings. Distant streetlights cast a yellowish, flickering light that barely illuminated the alley entrance. There were no security cameras in sight, and the nearby buildings were dark and silent. There were no witnesses. His gaze stopped at the unconscious body of the leader. It was the source of information he needed. It wasn't just another corpse to leave behind, it was the key to understanding Umbrella's true scope. John, with his unshakable pulse, knew he had to take him. And he couldn't do it obviously. He approached Sarah, who was still sitting on the ground, her eyes fixed on the inert bodies, her face a mask of pure terror. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She only trembled. John knelt, his voice a grave whisper that cut through the cold air. "You know this city," he told her, his voice low-toned. "A place, close by, empty, far from the police." Sarah looked at him, her mind in a state of panic. Her eyes, filled with terror, couldn't process what John was asking of her. I don't know." John moved with the urgency that a man like him only uses in life or death situations. "Think, side streets, old buildings, something abandoned, no cameras." His voice, despite still being flat, had an undertone of urgency. Sarah's eyes widened. The logic in John's words, despite the absurdity of the situation, resonated with her. Her mind, though terrified, began to work. There's an old warehouse near the port," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They closed it years ago. No one goes there. The main entrance is boarded up, but there's a side door that's always open." "Let's go," John said, his voice a whisper of urgency. Sarah stood up, her body still trembling, but with a new determination. Despite the fear, something in John's calmness gave her a strange sense of security. John, with the agility of a panther, examined the alley. His gaze stopped at a dumpster around the corner. An old, rusty shopping cart lay abandoned next to it. It was perfect. He pulled a large black trash bag from the dumpster and opened it. With a quick, fluid motion, he wrapped Marcus's unconscious body, covering him completely. It wasn't a trash bag, it was a disguise. John, without missing a beat, and with the same fluid motion, lifted Marcus's body and put him in the shopping cart. "Cover him," he ordered Sarah. Sarah, without hesitation, took old cardboard boxes and trash bags and placed them over the bundle, giving it a completely harmless appearance. It looked like just a bundle of trash. John's plan was perfect. An urban worker moving his trash in broad daylight wouldn't raise suspicions. They walked through the sunny streets, John pushing the cart, his eyes scanning the surroundings, and Sarah, still trembling, walking beside him, her eyes fixed on the ground, praying no one would see them. John's steps were fluid, his movements like a ghost. Although the cart was heavy, he moved it with an ease that only a man like him could possess. They moved through the streets of Raccoon City, a ghost and a victim, with a secret in a shopping cart. When they arrived at the warehouse, the side door was open. The interior of the warehouse was dark, filled with old boxes, dusty tarps, and the smell of dampness and rust. It was the perfect place. A place where no one would look for them. John pushed the cart to the center of the warehouse. Sarah's eyes filled with fear. She knew what was coming. John slammed the metal door shut with a screech, and the sound echoed in the darkness. Now, it was time for the torture. Now, it was time for John Wick to get the information from that man. Now, it was time for war. The screech of the metal door broke the silence, but it wasn't the only sound in the warehouse. The smell of dust and rust mixed with a sour and sweet stench, the unmistakable aroma of cheap drugs and alcohol. John stopped, his mind already on alert mode. He could hear whispering voices and muffled laughter coming from the center of the place. His instinct, as sharp as a scalpel, told him that the place was not as abandoned as he thought. If a church girl knew the site, it was likely that the place was a nest for the city's outcasts. The criminal world has its own rules, and an abandoned place in Raccoon City would be the perfect refuge for drug addicts and vagrants. John prepared for a confrontation, his hand in his pocket, and slowly approached, pushing the cart. The sound of his footsteps was muffled by the dust and dirt on the floor. In the center of the warehouse, under the only ray of light coming through a broken skylight, a group of 5 visibly intoxicated men were sitting in a circle, smoking. Hearing the screech of the door, they turned around, their eyes bloodshot. A mocking smile spread across their dirty faces as they saw John, in his casual but clean clothes, and Sarah, with her frightened face and delicate figure. One of them, a man with a mohawk haircut and a spider tattoo on his neck, stood up with a playful voice. "Look what the wind blew in, guys. A beautiful doll and a clean-cut boy. What are you doing here, lovebirds? Did you think this place was a good spot for your first date?" The other men laughed, their dry laughter echoing in the warehouse. They whispered things to each other, and most of their thoughts were morbid. Sarah stood behind John, her hand trembling as she held the fabric of his jacket. John didn't flinch. His eyes scanned the men, their movements, their intentions. A macabre thought crossed John's mind. They think my cargo is her, John thought with brutal irony. They're not interested in the trash, but in what's in it. They think it's something valuable, or drugs. A man looking for a place for a date with a beautiful girl and who also carries a bundle in a cart. Yes, they think it's something valuable to sell, or the same drug they consume. Easy, friend, the man with the tattoo continued, with a drawling voice. We don't want any trouble. We just want to talk. What do you have there? He gestured towards the cart. It looks like you're carrying something very heavy and valuable. Or maybe the medicine you and the girl were looking for. Maybe we can make a deal. Just leave the cart and you can leave alive. The Mohawk man pulled out a switchblade, and the blade glinted under the ray of light. He pointed it at John and spoke in a more serious voice. Leave the bundle and the girl, and you can leave alive. We don't want any trouble with you. The rest of the group stood up, their smiles turning into grimaces. John watched the man. He saw the knife, the hand trembling from the drug, the eyes that didn't look at his, but were fixed on the bundle and on Sarah. A sigh of resignation escaped him. There's no other option. This isn't a simple robbery. It's a threat, and one I must neutralize. But I can't kill them. I just left several bodies of Umbrella military personnel in an alley. Sooner or later they'll find them, and the police will start investigating. I don't know if the local police are under Umbrella's control or if they have access to the security cameras I saw in the electronics store. If I leave another 5 corpses here, the trail of bodies will lead me to a dead end. My best plan is to leave them unconscious, not out of mercy, but to avoid being tracked. Besides, seeing how drugged they are, it's almost impossible for anyone to believe them if they try to say something, or if they even remember what happened. The 5 men approached, the laughter gone. The tense silence was only broken by the men's footsteps. The Mohawk man was only 2 meters from John, and it was then that John, for the first time, spoke. His voice, as flat and cold as ever, made the men stop. No, I won't. John's voice was a deadly whisper, but one that echoed throughout the warehouse. If you want to stay alive, you'd better get out of here. And never see me again. Or I'll give you a lesson you won't forget, he said with a very cold and menacing voice. The Mohawk man laughed, a laugh that sounded like a metallic screech. Well, the boy's got guts, and a big mouth. I like that, he said, his eyes filled with anger and contempt. Let's see how big that mouth is. The man lunged at John, switchblade in hand, ready to stab him. John moved. It wasn't a ballet of violence like in the alley. This time, it was a dance of brutal efficiency. John's hand was a blur. He deflected the man's arm with a dry blow that made him drop the knife and scream. But John didn't stop. Instead of a knockout punch, John's fist, closed in a hammer blow, crashed into the man's elbow. The sound was a sickening crunch. The Mohawk man fell to his knees, his arm hanging at an unnatural angle, his face a mask of pure agony. You damn son of a bitch! He cried, his voice broken. I'm going to kill you. The others, seeing the speed and brutality of John's attack, looked at each other, their faces pale. Terror settled in their eyes. One of them, a big, sturdy guy, weighing about 100 kilos, mustered his courage. Get back, bastard, he yelled in his hoarse voice. You and me, right now. I'm going to break you in 2, you son of a bitch. He lunged at John, attempting a bear hug to immobilize him. But his attack wasn't frontal. With fear-driven speed, the man dove under John's arm, and crashed into his legs. The impact was brutal. John, who wasn't expecting it, fell on his back, the air escaping his lungs. The man, who had thrown himself with him, tried to grab him by the throat. It was a dirty attack, a desperate move by a cornered animal. But John Wick was no ordinary man. His mind, trained in the most refined violence, reacted before his body did. As he fell, his hand slid, quick and elegant, like a dancer's. His palm slammed against the back of the man's hand. It wasn't a simple blow. It was a Wing Chun move, a block and counterattack. John's strength, combined with the inertia of the fall, concentrated all the power of his blow on the man's wrist. The sound was a dry, horrible crunch, and a cry of pain, a cry of pure agony, escaped the man's mouth. The hand, now broken, released John's throat. The man, with a pale face and eyes full of tears, pleaded, "Please. Don't hurt me anymore. Mercy." John, without missing a beat, and with the same fluid movement, spun around, freeing himself from the man. With an elegant kick, he struck the man in the jaw, leaving him semi-conscious. The other two men, who were still standing, their eyes filled with terror, fled. "Let's get out of here, this guy's crazy," one of them shouted, as they ran towards the exit. John didn't move from the spot. With inhuman speed, he pulled out his silenced pistol, aiming at the legs of the two who were trying to escape. The first shot, a deadly whisper, hit one of the men in the knee. The second, in the other's ankle. Both screamed, falling to the ground with a thud. John walked slowly towards them, his voice a silent thunder. "That's what happens when you try to escape," he said in a very cold voice. "No one leaves here until I decide." The men crawled on the ground, their eyes full of terror. "Please, don't kill me. I have children," one pleaded. The other, his teeth clenched in pain, insulted him, "Rot, you damn bastard." John, impassive, bent down and punched them in the face, one by one, leaving them unconscious. Then he stood up and approached the Mohawk man, who was still writhing on the ground, crying from the unbearable pain of his broken arm. The man, between tears and babbling, tried to crawl away. "Don't hurt me, I'll give you anything you want. Money, drugs, whatever," he pleaded. John merely looked at him, his face devoid of emotion. "I don't need anything from you," he said, his voice a deadly whisper. "You're nothing more than a rat in a sewer. And rats are easy to crush." The Mohawk man screamed, "No. Wait, I'm not a rat, no, no." John didn't listen. He raised his hand with a quick and precise movement, and slammed it against the man's face. The blow, dry and brutal, broke the man's jaw. His head snapped back, and his eyes rolled back. He stopped screaming, pleading, and his body collapsed, completely inert. John, his breathing steady, approached the large man who was still writhing on the ground, crying from the unbearable pain in his wrist. John told him in a flat voice, "And you have it easier than them." With a final blow, John knocked him unconscious. Sarah stood watching the scene, her eyes wide. She had tried to look away the moment John fell, the moment the first man screamed, the horrible crunch of the second man's jaw. But she couldn't. Despite the fear that paralyzed her, her eyes were drawn to the controlled brutality, to the dance of a man who moved like a force of nature. Her breathing was quick and shallow, and her heart pounded like a drum. John, his clothes only having a faint smudge of dirt on his shoulder, didn't seem to have gone through a brutal fight. His face, clean and sweat-free, didn't reflect the horror he had just inflicted. The calm surrounding him was as dense as the dust in the warehouse. The bodies of the 5 men lay on the ground, unconscious. John, his breathing steady, approached Sarah, who was still behind him. "Everything's fine," he whispered. "There's no need to fear. Now, it's time to ask this man a few questions." John ignored the bodies of the thugs and moved them to a dark corner of the warehouse. His attention was completely focused on his target, the umbrella agent he had been pushing in the cart. John knelt and rummaged through the old boxes. He found a thick, dusty rope and used it to tie the man up. He tied his hands behind his back and his feet to a concrete pillar, making sure the man couldn't move once he was conscious. The man was still unconscious from the blow, so John worked uninterrupted. John approached Sarah, who was standing a few feet away, her eyes still fixed on the men on the ground. His voice was a grave whisper, but with a commanding tone. "Stay here, and don't look. Don't try to move. Don't go out, no matter what you hear. Understood?" Sarah nodded her head, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and obedience. John gestured to a darker spot in the corner, behind some boxes, out of direct sight. "Go, now," he said. Sarah slowly crawled to the corner, disappearing behind a stack of boxes. John watched her for a moment to make sure she had obeyed him, before turning back to the umbrella agent. John was not a man of words. He knelt, took a bottle of water from his inside pocket, and opened it. With a quick motion, he poured it on the man's face. The man jerked, and with a cough, began to wake up. His eyes opened, looking around confusedly, before the pain of his restraints and broken arm hit him. "Ah!" the man screamed, trying to struggle against the rope. John looked at him emotionlessly. "Easy, we're just going to talk." The man looked at him furiously. "Go to hell, I won't tell you anything. Umbrella will take care of you." John didn't flinch. "That's not an option. You have 2 paths. 1, you tell me what I want to know, and we finish this. Or 2, you tell me nothing, and I assure you that you will beg for death. The choice is yours. I am an umbrella soldier. I will die for the cause. I will tell you nothing, the man said in a firm voice, spitting on the ground. John stood up and slowly approached the man. The man's words, who thought he was a brave soldier, did not affect him. John, with his flat, deadly voice, asked the first question. The video, what was that thing? The man laughed, a dry, hoarse laugh. A product, the future, something you don't understand, you idiot. Just a rat like you. The man's laughter was what enraged John. It wasn't just the lack of information, it was the mockery, the arrogance of a man who believed his loyalty made him immune to pain. John's eyes darkened for a moment. The man, seeing the change in John's eyes, laughed, unaware that he had just signed his torture sentence. I told you, you idiot. I won't tell you anything. And I assure you that your attempts at torture will be in vain. My mind is stronger than you think. We'll see, was all John said. He knelt and, with a methodical and precise movement, used his thumb and forefinger to press a pressure point on the little finger of the man's right hand. A second later, a loud crack was heard. The man screamed, a sharp, painful cry that echoed in the warehouse. John moved to the next finger. Another crunch, another scream. Do you want to talk now? John asked, his voice as flat as ever. Ah, no, the man cried, his face a mask of pure pain. John continued, breaking the bones of the man's fingers, one by one, with chilling efficiency. The man's screams turned into moans, and from moans to pleas. Stop, please, stop. John stopped. And now, the question again. What is that thing? The man, with a pale and sweaty face, looked at John, his determination still strong. No, I won't tell you anything, you'll die before I do. John stood up. He approached the man's feet. The man, seeing what John was about to do, was filled with pure terror. No, not the feet, please. But John ignored him. He knelt and, with the same methodical movement, broke the big toe of the man's right foot. A heart-wrenching scream, a cry of pure agony, escaped the man's mouth. John continued, breaking each of the man's toes. The sound of bones breaking could be heard in the darkness of the warehouse. The man's screams turned into a squeal, a high note of pure pain. John finished, his breathing as steady as ever. The man, with a white face and trembling body, could only look at John with eyes full of fear. His determination was broken, but his pride prevented him from speaking. Last chance, John said, his voice a deadly whisper. Tell me what I want to know. Or we get creative. John pulled out his switchblade. The blade gleamed under the only ray of light coming through the skylight. The man saw the knife and his eyes widened, absolute terror flooding his face as he saw the tip. John's determination was clear. Slowly, he inserted the tip of the knife under the nail of the little finger, right at the edge broken by the previous blow. The tip of the knife pressed against the sensitive skin under the nail. The man gasped for air, his mouth opening in a silent scream. No. Please, the man cried, his eyes wide with fear. I'll tell you anything you want. Stop, please. John, impassive, held the knife close to his face, with the tip touching his throat. I'm listening. The man, with a pale face, hastened to speak, as if each word were a rope saving his life. Umbrella, officially, it's a pharmaceutical company. But that's a smokescreen. Pharmaceutical research was just to fund the real business. Creation of biological weapons. The T-virus. It's what you saw in the video. John's gaze was cold, showing no emotion. Since when? For decades, the man stammered. Since its foundation. The T-virus is the result of years of research into a deadly virus. The progenitor virus. At first, it was just for money, to sell biological weapons on the black market. But then it became an obsession. They wanted total control, a new era, where they would be the gods. Father Ben, he was an umbrella, priest, a liaison. He helped them test their products. In the video, John asked, his voice as flat as ever. The man who transformed, what was he? The man swallowed hard, his eyes again filled with genuine terror. An experiment, a failure. It wasn't just a normal T-virus. The virus mutated. A few months earlier, there was an incident in a mansion near the city. The virus escaped. They got infected. They mutated. The monsters escaped. The STARS team, they were sent to the mansion to contain the situation. They were the best. They were the only ones who could stop them, but they didn't. The man took a deep breath, and his eyes went wild with terror and desperation. Umbrella. Umbrella tried to cover it up. They wanted it to look like an accident, but some of the stars survived. A few of them, and one of them, a woman. Jill Valentine, she's a problem. She saw everything, she knows what Umbrella did. They want to kill her, they want her dead. John, impassive, asked the next question. And where is that woman hiding now? The man, despite being tied up, twisted and struggled against his bonds, whimpering and pleading. In her apartment, on the outskirts, on Oak Avenue, Building 24, Apartment 306. That's all, I don't know anything else. The man, having finished speaking, collapsed to the ground, sobbing, begging for his life. Stop, please, I've told you everything, I've answered your questions, mercy, don't kill me, please. John, with his expressionless face, stopped and looked at him. In his mind, the man's words echoed like thunder. Umbrella, a pharmaceutical company, a smokescreen, a biological weapons business. The information was a punch to the gut. In his world, that of contracts and continental rules, brutality was honest. You knew who you were dealing with. But Umbrella, a corporation, a pharmaceutical company, he had seen their ads on city billboards, in magazines. Selling hope, selling health, and in the shadows, selling monsters. Hypocrisy was a type of evil that John Wick found particularly repulsive. It wasn't just a dirty business, it was a corruption that extended to the lives of millions of innocent people, a large-scale lie that was not limited to a simple bribe or a hit for hire. The man, despite being tied up, twisted and struggled against his bonds, whimpering and pleading. Please, let me go, I won't tell anyone. John looked at him emotionlessly, his eyes cold and penetrating like ice. There was nothing he could do. This man was a loose end. He had seen the video, he had seen John kill, and he knew who he was. Letting him go was not an option. It would be a risk. A risk for him, a risk for Sarah, and a risk for a woman John Wick didn't know. With a speed that only a man like him could possess, John pulled out the silenced pistol. There was no hesitation, there was no emotion. The bullet, a deadly whisper, struck the man in the forehead. The body twitched, and the face, which was pale with fear, turned into a mask of surprise. His eyes, which were filled with tears, remained open, lifeless. The man's body collapsed to the ground, inert. The silence of the warehouse was broken by the echo of the silenced gunshot. John stood up, his breathing as steady as ever. This man's death was the only option. The information he had obtained was much more valuable than he expected. Now, John Wick had a new objective. A few minutes earlier, Sarah huddled behind the boxes, her hands over her ears, her body trembling uncontrollably. The warehouse, which had once seemed like a refuge, was now hell. She could hear the man's screams, the blood-curdling cracks, and the monotonous whisper of John Wick's voice. It was a symphony of terror. She couldn't bear it, she swayed back and forth, hoping the movement would bring her back to reality. Her lips moved, emitting an inaudible whisper of prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Suddenly, a wave of heat hit her, an intense fever that made her gasp. Sweat streamed down her forehead and back, soaking her clothes. It was a sensation she had never felt before, as if burning lava flowed through her veins, scorching every cell of her body. She tried to ignore it, trying to calm down, but the sensation was so powerful that the heat of her body would not allow it. God, what's happening to me? She thought, her mind in a state of panic. The prayer stopped, replaced by a moan of pain. The fever was a new kind of terror, an internal enemy that was consuming her. And then, she felt something else. An overwhelming thirst, a visceral need that could not be quenched by water. It was a deeper, more primal thirst. A need that burned her throat and forced her to open her mouth. A thirst for something she couldn't name. Her mind was in a storm, her body in an internal battle. Her head hurt, her stomach churned, and all she could think about was the thirst. The thirst dominated her, consumed her, and her gaze, full of a desire she didn't understand, shifted to the bodies of the thugs, who lay unconscious in the darkness. They were just bodies, but the thirst made them seem like something more. Something that could quench her. Slowly, like a puppet coming to life, she stood up. Her feet moved with an eerie slowness. The fever made her feel strong, powerful, invincible. Saliva dripped from her mouth, forming a thread that ran down her chin. Her eyes, which had been full of tears, were now fixed on the men's bodies, her pupils dilated by desire. Every step she took was a sigh of longing. The voice in her head called her, the thirst devoured her. Her mind darkened, and her instinct guided her. She approached the bodies, ignoring the man's screams that still came from the center of the warehouse, ignoring John Wick, ignoring everything. Only the bodies mattered. The bodies were the solution to her thirst. Slowly, she approached one of them. Her hand, which had trembled before, was now still. John had saved her from Father Ben, but something inside her had awakened. Chapter 6. The Oath. The echo of the silenced shot dissipated in the thick air of the warehouse. The lifeless body of the Umbrella agent lay at the foot of the column, a dead weight that no longer mattered. The information was all that remained. John, his breathing as steady as ever, stood motionless for a moment. His mind, a constantly running threat processor, was in planning mode. Umbrella. The word echoed in his mind, not as a brutal echo of death, but as confirmation. The bits of information from the man, vague as they were, had opened a Pandora's box. The mansion, the virus, the monsters, Jill Valentine, it all came together in a single thread of depravity and power. The trail of bodies he had left behind was nothing more than a distraction in the great chess game Umbrella was playing. The mere fact that they were willing to use a virus as a biological weapon told John that these were not men. They were monsters. And it was at that moment, when he understood the true nature of the corporation, that an image of Winston came to mind, his serious face, his eyes filled with genuine concern. Now, Winston's words made more sense than ever. If you ever hear the word Umbrella, run, John. Don't ask questions, just run. The plan to escape Raccoon City wasn't dead. It had taken on a new urgency. Sarah was a victim of this, and John, a man of oaths and debts, couldn't abandon her. Now, his only purpose was to get out of the city with her, no matter what it took. John approached the corner, certain he would find Sarah there. The darkness of the boxes hid her from view, but John knew she was there. Sarah, John whispered, his voice flat but with a hint of urgency. There was no response. Sarah, he repeated, this time a little louder. Silence was the only answer. John's mind began to work again. He made several logical assumptions. Maybe she ran away, got tired of waiting, maybe she fell asleep. He shook his head. She was afraid. She wouldn't have moved from that spot. Unless. John prepared himself for the possibility that she was injured or had hidden deeper. He decided to call her again, but this time with a more authoritative tone. Sarah, he said, his voice a deep whisper that cut through the icy air. But the silence of the warehouse was broken. A strange sound, a crunching noise, like bones and flesh. John stood still, his senses heightened by the noise. More thugs, more drug addicts. He prepared for another confrontation, his hand in his pocket, and slowly approached, weapon at the ready. The sound of his footsteps was muffled by the dust and dirt on the floor. In the corner, under the only light from the skylight, a dark shape moved over the body of the Mohawk thug, who lay unconscious, his arm broken and his jaw crushed. The lump moved strangely, with a spasmodic motion, as the sound continued. The crunching of bones became clearer, closer. John did not see Sarah in the corner. He only saw the lump in front of the thug's body. John, breathing steadily, approached, thinking it was someone trying to rob him. 10 meters away, a strong stench reached his nose. It was a nauseating smell, a mixture of blood, entrails, and something else. A smell of death. John frowned. The smell was so strong that it made his head hurt. At that moment, the lump turned around. No. It can't be. It was Sarah. Her face was covered in blood, her mouth stained with a thick, dark red. A trickle of saliva and blood ran down her chin, and her eyes, which had been filled with tears, were now bloodshot, her pupils dilated with hunger. John was in shock. Her hand slipped, but not to pull out the gun, but to grab the wall so she wouldn't fall. I had never seen anything like it. A trail of blood ran from her lips, and what appeared to be the thug's intestine was in her hand as she devoured it with the greed of an animal. Damn it, I saved her, or did I bring her to her death? John realized his mistake. He had saved her, but she had already been infected. The video he saw in the church basement, the man who had transformed, it all made sense. The pale skin, the white eyes. Sarah, despite having a paler complexion than normal, her eyes weren't completely white. It was a stage of the transformation. She's not a monster. She's a victim, but one who has become a monster. I remember the basement, the sound of metal in the air, the syringe. Father Ben. I stood still, assessing the situation. I didn't want to make a false move. I have always trusted my eyes. My instincts. The certainty that I know when to intervene. But I was wrong. I should have killed him right then and there. I should have intervened before the needle touched his skin. And now this is my fault. Sarah, who had already noticed John's presence, approached him with a slow, creepy step. Her gaze was not that of a victim, but of a beast. John, who was stunned, took several steps back. It wasn't fear, it was a mixture of terror and despair. Sarah, John whispered, his voice a thread. Stop, come to your senses. But there was no response. Only a low, deep growl. John, for the first time, felt that he had no plan. He couldn't shoot her. He couldn't kill her. He was a professional, a man who killed for a living. But this wasn't a job. This was a tragedy. He felt a desperation at not being able to do anything. Do something. Try something. Try to save her. Sarah, it's John, he said again, his voice flat but with a hint of pleading. Sarah's figure, her body trembling and slow, approached John. With great regret, John began to draw his weapon. The pistol, an extension of his arm, felt heavy in his hand. The same weapon that had killed hundreds of men, that had ended 1,000 lives, felt like an unbearable weight. As he drew it, memories of Sarah came flooding back, like an avalanche of images. The first time he saw her, tied to the bed. The first time she spoke to him, her voice broken with fear. And then, the moment she stepped out of the shower, like a new creature, a rebirth, her face without makeup and her hair wet. She was the image of innocence. And now, he had to kill her. The irony was so cruel that it made his heart ache. With a tremor in his hand that he couldn't control, John aimed at Sarah's legs, a quick shot without hesitation. I just need to stop her. Give me time, maybe there's something I can do. The bullet hit her knee, causing her to lose her balance and fall to the floor with a cry of pain. John, without hesitation, dropped his gun on the floor and began to look around desperately. He was in a warehouse. There had to be something to immobilize her. His eyes scanned the room, searching for something, anything that could help. He saw a pile of boxes and, behind them, a reel of old cables. It wasn't a rope, but it was strong enough. It wasn't a plan, it was desperation. He hurried to grab the cables and approached Sarah again. He moved with the determination of a man who still refused to accept his fate. Hold on, Sarah, just a little longer, he murmured, not sure if he was saying it out loud or just thinking it. He bent down, intending to tie her feet to keep her from moving. She lay on the floor, writhing in pain from her injured knee, and the blank look on her face was that of a wild animal. Just as John was about to approach her, she stopped. Her eyes, which had been bloodshot, suddenly filled with tears. John, she whispered, her voice broken with pain. It hurts so much. Tears streamed down her cheeks, washing away the traces of blood and dirt. Please, John, please kill me. I don't want to become a monster. Tears streamed down her face, and her eyes, still with a trace of lucidity, looked at him with a pain that could not be described in words. And with her last breath, her voice barely audible, she said to him, John, you're a good person. The rope, which she still held tightly in her hand, slipped and fell to the floor with a thud. The hope that had burned for a moment was suddenly extinguished. The moment of lucidity was over. Her face was once again that of a monster, her gaze empty. John, with a deep sadness and a determination he had never felt before, raised his gun. This isn't a job, this is an act of compassion. And it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. The bullet, a deadly whisper, pierced her skull. Sarah's body collapsed to the floor, lifeless. John approached her, his feet making a dull thud. He saw her, her pale skin, her bloody mouth. He saw her, and he saw her as a reminder of his own life, of the life he had lost. At that moment, the dam of his control broke. It wasn't just a job. It wasn't just running away. Sarah's face, her last plea, the final stillness of her body, everything was etched into his memory, not as a scar, but as a mark burned into his soul. The sadness that had drowned him for a moment was transmuted into cold, pure fury, a rage so deep that it made his blood boil in his veins. With a stiffness that was anything but human, he stood up. His gaze, once filled with devastating grief, turned into an icy flame, a promise of destruction. John, without hesitation, began to move around the warehouse. He piled the wooden boxes and old pallets against the wall, forming a makeshift pyre, a deathbed that served as a final gesture of respect. Then he lifted Sarah's body with a strength and delicacy that did not match the brutality of the moment. The blood on her face and the dirt on her clothes didn't matter, she was still, in that moment, the innocent he had tried to save. He placed the body on the pyre, and the light from the skylight above illuminated her face. John, his face expressionless, took his lighter out of his pocket, lit it, and dropped it into the pyre. The fire, with a soft roar, began to consume the wood, sending flashes of light dancing across the dark walls. The smell of smoke and burning wood filled the air, a smell that purified the fetid air of the warehouse. The crackling of the fire was the only sound, a music of purification and pain. John stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the flames consuming the wood. Over the past few months, he had tried to bury Baba Yaga, to hide him under a layer of peace and routine. But at that moment, watching the fate of innocence burn before him, he understood. The answer was no longer a choice. The life he had dreamed of was a lie, a fragile illusion that Umbrella had shattered. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, the gleam in them was not one of sorrow, but of brutal, cold certainty. He turned away from the flames and whispered, his words seemingly devoured by the fire. "Sarah, there used to be a life I was trying to protect. But that life burned with you, and I assure you that those responsible for your death will all die by my hand. And now, yes, John Wick is back." And the echo of his words, an echo of death, was lost in the darkness, and only the crackling of the flames remained, an echo of John's fury. Chapter 7. The Hunter's Plan. September 25th. Raccoon City. The warehouse. 3 p.m. The air in Raccoon City, heavy with the stench of death and fear, felt even denser after the warehouse had been cleaned out. John's footsteps were a silent rhythm against the broken pavement. He had left the flames behind, but the image of Sarah, her final plea, and the smell of smoke and blood had stuck to his skin like an invisible shroud. The rage that had roared inside him had cooled into a brutal determination, a singular purpose that left no room for pain or regret. He reached the hotel entrance, an oasis of order in a desert of chaos. The lobby was empty except for the usual receptionist, a man with a serious face and tired eyes who was unfazed by anything. When he saw John, his normally expressionless face showed a hint of concern. The blood on his clothes and the empty look in his eyes spoke louder than any explanation. "Mr. Wick," said the receptionist, his voice a whisper in the stillness of the night. "It looks like you've had a difficult day." John stopped, his gaze fixed on the man. The receptionist was no longer just an employee, he was a witness to his return. There was no answer he could give. A simple nod of the head was the only way John could respond. "I just need my room," John said, his voice a low whisper, colder than the night air. The receptionist nodded, his face now back to normal. He handed John the key, which he took without saying a word. He climbed the stairs, and the quietness of the hotel was a contrast to the chaos of the city. He entered his room, and the clean air and freshly made bed gave him a sense of normality that made him feel even stranger. He took off his jacket and shirt and saw that the blood had dried. He went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The man he saw was not the man who had left. The eyes he had seen in the mirror, filled with pain and remorse, had been replaced by a cold stare. His fists were clean, but the trace of Sarah's blood was a silent reminder of his failure. He took his phone out of his pocket, an old model, and dialed a number. The phone rang several times before a voice answered. "John," said Winston's voice, sounding tired. "I thought you'd be on the road by now. Please tell me you're out of the city." "I'm not far," said John, his voice a whisper, but Winston knew it was a declaration of war. "I can't help you with this, John. I don't have any information. I'm asking you to let it go." Winston's voice sounded tense and reluctant. "Umbrella is different. They're a force that transcends our world. If you mess with them, there will be no place to hide." "I know what Umbrella really does," John interrupted, his voice a cold whisper. "I know about their test subjects. I saw it, I experienced it firsthand." A long sigh echoed over the line. Winston fell silent for a few seconds, as if processing the information. "So you already know about that," he said, his voice now tinged with resignation. "I knew I couldn't stop you. Fine, if you're determined to walk into hell, at least let me give you a map. Its existence is a dark stain. An organization that operates in the shadows and with a lot of money. All I know is that they have several public infrastructures for recruiting test subjects." "What kind of facilities?" John said, his voice a command, not a question. "Hospitals, schools, churches, anywhere they can find people for their experiments. Their power is so great that no one looks for them. John, please, let it go, Winston said. I can't, John said, his voice a whisper. Not after. I understand now, Winston interrupted, his voice soft but weighted with deep understanding. This is personal for you. I know. That's why I need a new target, John said. Thanks for the information, Winston. Don't think this is the same as the high table. Winston's voice became grave and urgent, a whisper that was more terrifying than a scream. Umbrella has no rules, John. And when they realize you exist, so will the high table. Two powerful organizations will likely be after your head. And believe me, even though Umbrella and the high table don't get along. His voice stopped abruptly. There was a sound of static, then a sharp click. Sorry, I have something, we'll talk later. The call was cut off. John sat on the bed, his hand still holding the phone. Winston's incomplete sentence echoed in his mind. What was it that the high table and Umbrella didn't get along? And what did that mean for him? He got up from the bed, the dried blood and dirt on his clothes feeling like a weight. Silently, he stuffed his shirt and pants into the small drum of the hotel's washing machine, a discreet service for guests of his caliber. Then he knelt down and pulled a black cloth backpack from under the bed. With the zipper open, he spread it out to check its contents. There were compact pistols, a disassembled sniper rifle, a small amount of assorted ammunition, and several hidden knives. He mentally took stock of what he had, noting that ammunition was scarce and that the firepower was insufficient for what he had in mind. A hunter couldn't hunt with an empty barrel. His short-term goal was clear: resupply at Robert Kendo's armory. First, a bath. He stepped into the shower and let the hot water pound his body, washing away the blood and sweat. He felt the clarity of the water on his skin, and it spread to his mind. The confusion dissipated, replaced by cold, hard determination. The path was dangerous, doubly dangerous now with the possible involvement of the high table, but the goal was the only thing that mattered. As steam filled the room, a clear memory came to mind. Earlier that day, just a few hours ago, Sarah had been in this very room, sitting on the bed, enjoying an impromptu breakfast. The image of her laughing, the morning sun lighting up her face, caused a sharp pain to burn in his chest, but instead of making him falter, it only increased his fury. Every drop of water falling from his hair was a reminder that he had to make Umbrella pay. He stepped out of the shower, dried himself off, and put on his new suit. It was an elegant, completely black, tailor-made suit that felt like a second skin. The fabrics of his suit, a blend of high-quality wool and a special polymer, were lightweight and flexible, yet strong enough to deflect a bullet. It was the armor of a ghost, protection that would not hinder his movement. With the suit on, he looked like a businessman, a gentleman. But the lines of his body were tense, his movements silent and decisive, his gaze a weapon in itself. He left the room, his footsteps silent, and went downstairs. The receptionist, upon seeing him, said nothing, only giving him a slight nod. John headed for a street he knew well. In Raccoon City, the underworld network was as dark as the streets. Gun shops were the only places where he could find what he needed. He stopped in front of a building. A sign that read, "Kendo Gun Shop," hung on the door. John opened the door and the sound of a bell welcomed him. The place was dark, and the smell of guns filled the air. A man emerged from the back room, rifle in hand. He was a man in his 50s, thinly built, with a scruffy beard. He was Robert Kendo, one of the best gunsmiths in town. His eyes met John's, and an expression of surprise and fear mingled on his face. Kendo, despite his reputation as a man of few words, couldn't help but feel intimidated by John's gaze. "Mr. Wick," he whispered, his voice a thread, "I thought you had left town." "No," John said, his voice a whisper. "I came back. Business seems to be booming," Kendo said, trying to break the ice. "But I don't know if you've heard, there's news on everyone's lips. The priest was found dead inside the church a couple of hours ago. And also, there were some murders in an alley near an electronics store. Unless you..." Kendo paused, looking at him with a mixture of caution and a hint of dark humor. "Did you kill the priest for telling you that rumor?" John didn't respond to the joke. His gaze was like steel. "I just need a few things," he said, his voice cold as ice. Kendo nodded and walked over to a shelf. He handed John an assault rifle, a few pistols, and grenades. John took them, his gaze scanning for the essentials. "I also need ammunition. 1 box of each caliber for the weapons you've given me." Kendo, surprised, raised an eyebrow. 1 box of each, Mr. Wick. That's a considerable amount. Are you planning to start a war? John didn't answer. He just walked over to a shelf and took a couple of canvas bags. Also, please, I'd like to buy the weapons and disassemble them right here. It's much easier to transport them that way, he said, stuffing the bags into his backpack. Kendo, confused, nodded and brought him the necessary tools. John, with impressive precision and speed, disassembled the weapons, separating the barrels, triggers, magazines, and stocks. Kendo watched, eyes wide. The skill with which he did it was that of a man who had done this thousands of times. John put the pieces into a backpack, as if they were pieces of a puzzle. The total is $20,000, said Kendo, his voice a little louder. John reached into his pocket and pulled out 4 gold coins. Kendo took them, confused, looking at them closely. They didn't have the typical US government seal, but the engraving was strangely beautiful, even though he didn't recognize it. I haven't seen these before, Kendo muttered, his curiosity overcoming his caution. Pure gold, 24 karat, John said, his voice dry. They're worth much more than that. Kendo, who knew about precious metals, nodded, his expression becoming more serious. He put the coins away, knowing that John wasn't joking. It was clear that this man, whom he thought had left, had returned with a relentless purpose. Kendo didn't know why John had come back, but he could feel the heaviness in the air, the same heaviness that hung over the streets. With his weapons ready, John left the store. The sky above Raccoon City was tinged with orange and violet hues. It was twilight. John felt that the night was his ally. Despite not having slept the night before while watching over Sarah, he felt no fatigue. Adrenaline and pure determination kept him going. Moving in the dark would be easier. The chaos and uncertainty of nighttime in Raccoon City would provide him with the cover he needed. He walked back to the hotel, a return that felt very different from the night before. At the front desk, the receptionist greeted him with his usual formality. "Good evening, Mr. Wick," he said. His gaze slid over John's figure. "I see you've returned alone. What about the girl who was with you? I hope she's all right." The question was an unexpected blow. John paused for a second, his expression unchanging. The mention of Sarah made the coldness in his eyes intensify. "It's okay," he replied, his voice a whisper so faint it was barely audible. He walked past, not looking the man in the eye. He climbed the stairs, and the receptionist's question hung in the air. Once in his room, John closed the door with a soft click. He set his backpack on the table and opened it, its contents a mixture of weapon parts and ammunition. With precise, methodical movements, he began assembling the pistols and rifle, fitting each piece together with a familiarity that would frighten anyone. It wasn't a task, it was meditation. The room became his own weapons workshop, a sacred space where the chaos outside could not enter. His mind, a storm of images of Sarah and boiling rage, found calm in the ritual. He took the slide of one of the pistols, one of the most compact ones, and slid the barrel out. The click of the piece fitting into place was a clean, perfect sound. A click that confirmed that order had been restored. Then he took the recoil spring, placed it between his thumb and index finger, and pushed it down. The click of the spring snapping into the slide echoed in the silence of the room. It was a click of acceptance, of resignation to the reality that the world was no longer a safe place. Then he took the frame of the pistol, his hand sliding over the cold polymer. He held the weapon in his right hand, the slide in his left, and with a smooth, fluid motion, he snapped the slide into the frame. The final click was the voice of vengeance. It was the sound of the promise that each of those pieces, now joined together, would find their target. It was the sound of blood that would be spilled, of justice that would be done. He continued with the assault rifle, a longer process, but just as methodical. Each pin, each spring, each component was one step closer to his goal. The click of each piece falling into place was a reminder that he was a weapon, and that weapon was being fine-tuned for a single purpose, the annihilation of Umbrella. Once everything was in place, he did a mental inventory of everything he had, checking his ammunition and equipment. Then he went over to his suitcase and pulled out a map of the city. It was an old map, one he had borrowed from the Raccoon City police station in his early days. It was wrinkled and stained, but still legible. He unfolded it and pinned it to the wall, using his knives to hold it in place at the corners. He stood there, his eyes scanning the map. Winston's information echoed in his head. Hospitals, schools, churches. They were large, public targets. And he had already had a stroke of luck with the church. He had found what he was looking for, but luck was a finite resource, and he didn't trust it. Besides, the attack on the church and Umbrella's men meant they now knew someone was hunting them. The obvious targets, the recruitment points, would be fortified, or at least under surveillance. A frontal attack would be reckless. His mind drifted to the policewoman, Jill Valentine. She was from the city, a member of STARS. Special Tactics and Rescue Service. A valuable resource. She might have information about Umbrella. She might have access to files, to data that would take him days, or weeks, to obtain. The idea was tempting, but he dismissed it almost as quickly as he had considered it. It wasn't the right time. He couldn't show up at her apartment door in the middle of the night, his face covered in soot and reeking of gunpowder. It wasn't prudent. It would be an unnecessary risk, a distraction. There was a time for subtlety, and this was not it. The night was young, and he had to take advantage of it. The urgency of revenge demanded action, not caution. The information could wait. John took a deep breath and returned his gaze to the map. Patience was a virtue, but action was the only way to purge his soul. If the big targets were too dangerous, what about the small ones? Winston had said that Umbrella was in every corner of the city. And that included pharmacies, medicine stores, and other, civilian, establishments. They could be fronts for their operations. He wouldn't find valuable information, not necessarily. He wouldn't find the names of executives or the blueprints of their laboratories. But he might find something. A name, a number, a code. Something that could lead him to the next target, and then the next, and the next. Like a hunter following a blood trail. He approached the wall and, with a knife, marked a spot on the map. A pharmacy in the eastern part of Raccoon City, in a low-traffic area. It wasn't the main target, but it was a start. He had to start somewhere. The hunt had begun, and this time, he wouldn't stop until there was nothing left. With methodical precision, he stripped off the civilian clothes he was wearing. His combat suit, the one he had used for his missions, was ready. But this was not a large-scale mission. He wasn't going to raise a building. He was going to slip through the shadows, a ghost, a shadow. And for that, he needed a different arsenal. From the backpack he had assembled, he took out a P30L pistol with a silencer. He tucked it into the holster on his waist, which was hidden under his jacket. The weapon was an extension of his arm, a precision tool. He placed an ammunition belt, carefully wrapped in a canvas bag, around his waist, along with the extra compact magazines. Then he tucked two small pistols into the legs of his pants, one on each side, no bigger than his palm but lethal enough. Finally, he took 3 knives out of his backpack, a combat knife that he kept in a hidden pocket in his jacket, another that he tied to his boot, and a third that he hid inside his forearm. He looked at himself in the mirror. The man he saw was a figure in black. The suit, perfectly tailored, concealed each of his weapons. He looked like a businessman, a quiet man, a ghost in the city. But in the reflection of his eyes, the truth was clear. He was not a man. He was a living weapon. Every movement, every step, every breath, everything was destined for one thing: destruction. The Umbrella Pharmacy was in his way. Chapter 8. First Attack. September 25th, Raccoon City. 10 p.m. The silence of the night in Raccoon City was an illusion. John Wick knew it. It was a cloak that hid the whisper of the wind, the rustling of trash in the street, and the unspeakable stench of something decomposing in the darkness. John walked with the lightness of a ghost, his black suit a veil that made him disappear into the shadows. He approached his target, the Umbrella Pharmacy on the east side of town. John, his pulse unchanging, observed the pharmacy. At first glance, it was a normal place. The lights were shining inside, and the "open 24 hours" sign was flashing. Behind the thick glass of the security window, a young man in a white uniform was looking at his phone, the light from the screen illuminating his bored face. John approached the window, his face twisted into a slight grimace of discomfort. "Excuse me," he said in a hoarse voice. "I need something for a severe stomach ache. Do you have anything for that?" The clerk looked up from his phone, his bored expression unchanged. "Yes, sir. Are you looking for omeprazole, perhaps? It's the most common." "Yes, that's it," John replied in a voice of feigned resignation. "That would be fine." The young man ascended and walked down an aisle, disappearing behind one of the tall shelves. This was the moment. With the window empty, John cautiously leaned forward and pressed his face against the glass. The pharmacy's interior was bathed in fluorescent light that revealed every corner, providing little opportunity for stealthy infiltration. The glowing lights revealed tall shelves stacked with medicines and pharmaceuticals. But John's attention was drawn to something else: the men. He saw 2 guards, dressed in gray uniforms and bulletproof vests. They were bored, almost drowsy. One of them was yawning as he leaned against a wall. Their presence there confirmed his suspicions were correct. The pharmacy was an umbrella front. The clerk returned to the window, a bottle of omeprazole in his hand. When he saw John, he stopped, surprised by his pose. John was no longer simply standing. He was on his knees, his body hunched over, his hands clenched over his abdomen, his face twisted in a mask of unbearable pain. "Sir, are you okay?" the clerk shouted, his voice echoing in the silence of the pharmacy. John leaned closer, a moan escaping his lips. "No, I can't get up. Please help." Alarmed by the sudden change in the situation, the young man rushed out of the pharmacy, leaving the door half open. He hurried toward John, intending to help him. He saw John get up, his hand no longer on his stomach, sliding under his jacket. The employee opened his mouth to scream, but there was no time. His mind barely had time to register the cold reality before John stood up in one fluid motion and struck him on the temple with the butt of his P30L pistol with silencer. The young man collapsed to the floor, knocked out, without making a sound. John bent down and, with precise, methodical movements, unscrewed the silencer from the muzzle of his pistol. The small object, which had previously been an advantage, would now be a hindrance in close combat. A silencer, no matter how compact, could interfere with the grip or get in the way in a closer-range confrontation. He tucked it into a hidden pocket in his jacket. He stood up, his gaze icy. The hunt had begun, and John, pistol in hand, moved with the fluidity of a predator. He slipped quickly through the half-open door. The air inside, colder and sterile, contrasted with the stench of the street. He crouched down quickly and slid behind a nearby shelf, covering himself with a wall of pill bottles and beauty products. He knew that his figure, although camouflaged in the darkness, would be revealed with a little attention. It was temporary cover. From his position, he scanned the pharmacy. The 2 guards were still at their posts, bored and lethargic. John watched their movements, their patterns. One leaned against the wall next to a cooler, the other yawned as he checked his communicator. They weren't veterans, they were pawns. A shot, even without a silencer, could be an unnecessary risk. If anyone else was nearby, if there was a noise monitoring system, the trail of destruction would begin too soon. A knife would be quieter and more precise. A shot to the neck or head would be a silent, clean kill. And the other one, how would he stun him? A blow to the head, precise and quick, but with enough force to knock him out without killing him. The first guard was the key to a stealthy elimination. The hunt had begun, and John knew that this time there would be no witnesses. He glided like a shadow, his free hand already in his jacket pocket, pulling out one of the knives. With his gaze fixed on the first guard, who was distracted, he prepared for a deadly throw. Upstairs, in a windowless room filled with flickering monitors, an overweight young man wearing a baseball cap, who had been munching on a bag of chips, jumped in surprise. He let out a squeal that caught the attention of his colleague, a burly man with a mustache. "What's wrong, idiot?" asked the man with the mustache. "An intruder," whispered the young man, his eyes wide. "They just showed it on the pharmacy camera. It's unbelievable." A small, almost invisible security camera, hidden between 2 shelves, recorded John Wick's every move. A live recording of an infiltration that was no longer silent. The man with the mustache approached the monitor, and what he saw made him drop the communicator from his hand. The image was clear. The guard next to the cooler lay motionless, a knife stuck in his neck, and the other guard was on the floor, unconscious. And there, in the center of the screen, was a man in a black suit, kneeling over the knocked-out guard. Impossible. How the hell did he get in? "The guards are down." The man with the mustache grabbed his communicator. "Alert. Intruder in the pharmacy, ground floor. Code red. Repeat. Code red. All personnel on the upper floor, deploy now. Activate the containment protocol." The sound of heavy boots echoed on the ceiling. John Wick, kneeling over the knocked-out guard and about to tie him up, heard the thunder of footsteps descending the stairs. It wasn't just one pair of boots. It wasn't 2. It was many. Too many for a simple robbery. Just then, the dead guard's communicator fell into his ears, a deep voice, almost a whisper. "All personnel on the upper floor, deploy now." John's gaze hardened. He stood up, scanned the room, and saw a group of shadows approaching the hallway. He wondered how they had discovered him. The speed with which they had detected him, the speed of their reaction, and the number of guards approaching all set his mind racing. These weren't bored pawns, they were the elite. The air filled with palpable tension, and the footsteps grew closer. John braced himself for the fight. There was no escape. This time, the hunter had become the prey. John moved. There was no time to hesitate. An inch of distraction was an inch of death. He slid, his body becoming a shadow, as he slipped between two of the tallest shelves. The space was narrow, almost claustrophobic, but it provided perfect cover. From his position, the entrance hallway was a long, narrow canyon. The sound of boots grew louder, the echo of footsteps on the concrete floor growing. They were close. "Damn it, where are the others?" said a deep voice. "I don't know, but look at this," replied another voice. John heard a pause, the silence broken only by the guard's heavy breathing. "Holy mother, he's got a knife to his throat. Who the hell is this guy? And the other one is knocked out, but alive. And why is the communicator open?" A chill ran down John's spine. They had discovered the communicator. If they were a professional team, they would have already tracked him down. Time was running out. "Never mind, listen, follow containment protocol. You and I this way," said the deep voice. The others, down the hallway on the right. The group of 4 guards split up. John watched as 2 of them moved to the right, while the other 2 stayed behind to inspect the guard's body. The group of 2, unbeknownst to them, was moving directly toward John's location. John remained still, his breathing slow and controlled. He waited, one hand on the P30L, the other on the knife. "Damn it, it's pitch black in here," muttered one of the guards from the group heading toward him. "Shut up and search," his partner replied. "We don't know what kind of lunatic we're dealing with." The first guard rounded the corner of the shelf, his weapon raised, his gaze scanning the narrow corridor. He saw a shadow. And that was it. In a split second, John burst out of his hiding place, a blur of movement. The knife, which had been in his hand, flew in a deadly arc and plunged with a sickening sound into the guard's throat. The second guard, who was right behind him, screamed, his face a mask of horror. "No." But his scream was drowned out by the echo of the gunshot. John's P30L fired with a dull thud, the bullet piercing the air and lodging itself directly in the guard's head. The man collapsed to the floor. The other guard, who had been alerted by the sound, turned, his face pale. He saw John with his friend's body, the knife sticking out of his throat, using it as a shield. Blood gushed out, splattering John's uniform and the guard's face. "Son of a bitch," the guard shouted, firing without thinking. The bullets hit his friend's lifeless body, ricocheting off the bulletproof vest or burrowing into his flesh. It was useless. John disposed of the body, pushing it to the ground. His gaze was cold, calculating. The guard was in shock, his eyes wide as he stared at the killer and the blood. Without hesitation, John fired a shot directly at the guard's head, silencing him forever. The echo of the shots reverberated through the pharmacy, a symphony of death that alerted everyone. The other guards, who were inspecting the area of the first attack, stopped dead in their tracks. Their communicators crackled, their weapons raised. The sound came from the hallway on the right, from where they had split up. John, his gaze fixed on them, saw their eyes widen in a moment of horror and surprise. They were about 15 meters away, running toward him, weapons ready to fire. But John didn't wait for them to arrive. With a quick, powerful shove, he knocked over the shelf next to him. It was a tall, heavy metal shelf, but with John's strength and precision, it toppled over. Bottles of pills, boxes of medicine, and all kinds of products spilled out in a cascade of glass and plastic. The shelf crashed down, hitting the next shelf and triggering a domino effect that spread down the aisle. Boom, 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 shelf after shelf, each one collapsed, dragging the others down with them. The pharmacy was reduced to chaos, with twisted metal, broken glass, and pill dust everywhere. Several of the guards stopped, their eyes wide with surprise. One of them, the one in the lead, tried to dodge the shelf coming down on him, but he was too slow. The heavy shelf hit him, knocking him to the ground. His legs were trapped under the shelf, his arms clutching his weapon, his face contorted into a mask of pain. The other guards, distracted by the chaos, were forced to stop. Their attention focused on their injured comrade, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and surprise. "My God, he's trapped," one shouted. Never mind, the intruder is around here, said another, but it was too late. The distraction gave John a precious moment, a moment he did not hesitate to take advantage of. The first guard, the one who had shouted, raised his weapon, his mouth open in mid-sentence. Damn it, the guy is a... His voice cut off abruptly. A sharp, surgically precise shot hit him in the head, and his body collapsed to the ground like a rag doll. His weapon fell with a metallic clang. The other two guards, who were only a few feet away, went on alert. Fire! Covering fire! Shouted one. They started shooting, bullets from their pistols piercing the air. John, with his cat-like agility, ducked and slid behind the debris of the fallen shelves. He took cover behind a wall of twisted metal and cardboard boxes. The bullets hit the metal, ricocheting or piercing the boxes. John, meanwhile, moved like a snake, his free hand ready to attack, his P-30L ready to fire. Through a small gap between the fallen shelves, John saw the silhouettes of the guards. They were professionals, not fools. One of them, a man with a scar on his face, moved, trying to flank John. He slid down the left aisle, hoping to surprise him. John, who had keen hearing, heard the crunch of his boot on the broken glass. He knew he was flanking him. The guard peered around the other side of the shelves, his gun pointed. "I've got you, you bastard," he shouted. But his victory was short-lived. John spun around with a speed that defied physics, his body a blur of movement. The guard fired, but John, with a flick of his arm, used the fabric of his suit as a shield, creating a brief visual distraction. The bullet struck his arm and ricocheted into the air, but it didn't hurt him. There was no time for pain. John's P-30L fired, two quick, accurate shots that hit the guard's legs. The man screamed, his knee exploding in a sea of pain, and he fell to the ground, kneeling. "Arg, my legs," he screamed. How did you?" The guard, unable to comprehend John's speed and accuracy, was stunned. His gaze was lost in confusion. John's P-30L rose, and a third and final shot hit him in the head, silencing him forever. The other two remaining guards, the ones near the hallway on the right, stopped dead in their tracks. The sound of the gunshots, the cry of the wounded man, everything echoed through the pharmacy. They were out of ammunition. "Damn it, I need to reload," exclaimed one, and quickly pulled out another magazine. John didn't give them time to do so. He approached them, his black figure a shadow amid the chaos. The guard, who was about to finish reloading, looked up and saw John approaching. His face was a mask of pure terror. "No," he screamed, but it was too late. A shot to the chest, and the guard fell to the ground, his weapon dropping beside him. The last guard, who was about to insert a magazine, saw John approaching and, with his trembling hand, did so as quickly as possible. Just as he finished, he felt something hit him in the stomach. The force of the blow sent him flying, his weapon falling from his hand, and his body crashing into a wall. John's kick was brutally effective. The guard, dazed and breathless, remained on the floor, his weapon out of reach. John approached him, his face cold, his gaze a silent warning. The guard, who was on the floor, couldn't move. His eyes were wide open, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. John bent down and pointed the P-30L at his head. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, and without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. Silence fell over the pharmacy like a heavy blanket. The chaos of fallen shelves, the smell of blood and medicine, and the lifeless bodies lying on the floor. John walked slowly, his step steady and unhurried, as if the massacre he had just committed was nothing more than routine. He stopped in front of the last guard, the one who had been trapped under the shelf. The man groaned, his face contorted with pain and fear. "Please, please, no," murmured the guard, his voice a whisper muffled by the metal. John did not respond. His face was a mask of stone, his eyes wells of icy calm. The man, desperate, tried to free himself, but the heavy, sturdy shelf would not budge. His face, bathed in sweat and tears, looked up at John. I have children, my wife is waiting for me," he cried, his voice a pathetic plea that echoed in the silence. "Please, don't do this." John looked at him, his gaze impenetrable. There was no compassion, no mercy, not even a hint of curiosity in his eyes. The man's words, his promises, his children, were nothing but noise. At that moment, to John, the man was not a person, he was just an obstacle, the last one in his way. Without saying a word, John raised his P-30L. The barrel of the gun, cold and dark, was aimed directly at the guard's head. The man's eyes filled with absolute terror as he saw his inevitable end. He closed his eyes tightly, waiting for the blow. The shot echoed through the pharmacy. The guard's body shook. Then it lay still, his head tilted, pain and fear replaced by eternal peace. John did not lower his gun, did not move. He stood there, watching the body, as if contemplating the end of a chapter. And with the last shot, the pharmacy fell into total silence, broken only by the dripping of blood. John Wick turned around and headed toward his target. Upstairs, the young man in the baseball cap, his bag of chips forgotten, stared at the main screen. His face was pale, his eyes were wide, filled with utter shock. The monitor, which had captured every second of the massacre, now showed a man in a suit splattered with blood. The black suit, once immaculate, was now stained with the red of his victims. Blood dripped from his hands, splattering onto the cement floor with a wet sound. "No. It can't be," he murmured, his voice trembling. He covered his mouth with his hand, his eyes fixed on the screen. "He's a demon." The other man, the one with the mustache, stood beside him, his eyes wide with silent horror. They watched as the figure of John Wick moved with cold, unyielding purpose. The man in black approached the first guard, the one he had knocked out. With frightening speed, John pulled a pair of zip ties from his pocket and used them to bind the man's hands and feet, tightening them securely to ensure he couldn't move. "He's not going to kill him, is he?" whispered the man with the mustache, his voice a mixture of terror and awe. The figure on the screen finished securing the man. Then he turned to the bodies of the other guards he had killed. The young man in the baseball cap watched in horror as John knelt beside the body of the guard he had killed with the knife. With a quick, precise movement, he pulled out the knife. The metal, shiny and gleaming, came out of the throat with a disgusting sound. John wiped the blade with the dead man's clothes, then put the knife in his pocket. He just killed 6 of our men," said the young man, his voice full of disbelief. 1, 2, 3, the ones in the hallway, 5. And the one in the hallway, 5. And the one on the shelf, 6. 6. And he did it in less than a minute. No, he didn't," said the man with the mustache, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Look at the blood. He didn't kill the last one. He's going to interrogate him. Or something worse." Both watched, breathless, as John, his face smeared with blood and his suit torn, moved through the pharmacy, a ghost of death. He was looking for something. They didn't know what it was, but they knew one thing: the man on the screen was a hunter. And they were his prey. John headed for the stairs leading to the second floor, his footsteps silent and deadly. His mind was already calculating his next move. He had taken care of everyone on the first floor, but he knew there were more. His intuition, second nature after years of training, screamed that the real target was upstairs. That's when his gaze shifted. In the corner of the ceiling, almost invisible in the dim light, a small security camera was blinking. Its red lens, as small as a pinhead, was watching him. A silent growl escaped his lips, understanding flashing in his eyes. "So that's how they found me so quickly. It wasn't a mistake, it was a trap." The realization was like a switch, igniting a cold, brutal rage inside him. He stopped dead in his tracks, raised the P30L with deadly fluidity, and stared directly into the lens. His gaze was like 2 daggers of ice. The barrel of the gun, pointing directly at the camera, was a black dot in the center of his field of vision. In the monitoring room, the young man in the baseball cap and the man with the mustache froze. On the screen, John's figure stood still, his gaze fixed on the camera. They could feel the cold intensity of that gaze, even through the grainy video. "He's looking at me," whispered the young man, his eyes wide. "He knows we're here." The man with the mustache, his face pale and his hands shaking, couldn't look away. "No. It's not possible. How can he see us?" But before he could finish his sentence, there was a flash. The sound of a gunshot came through the speakers, followed by a crackle of static. The main monitor, the one showing John Wick, went blank. The young man in the baseball cap slumped in his chair, his hands shaking, his eyes fixed on the black screen. "Damn it, close the door, right now," shouted the man with the mustache. "Close it and lock it. For God's sake, he's coming for us." Both men stood up, their movements frantic, as the silence on the black screen grew heavier, more oppressive. John Wick, the ghost who had come back to life, was already coming for them. And this time, there was nowhere to hide. Chapter 9. First Attack Part 2. September 25th. Raccoon City. 10:15 p.m. The dim light from the pharmacy cast long, distorted shadows on the metal staircase. John Wick, his impeccable suit made even darker by the dried bloodstains of his fallen enemies, moved with the silent grace of a cat. He climbed the first flight of stairs, his dress shoes making hardly any noise. The voices of the men on the second floor, louder and more nervous than those of their comrades on the ground floor, revealed their state of panic. "Why isn't he coming up? What is he waiting for?" said a high-pitched voice. "I don't know, but he's killed everyone downstairs." "There's no one left," replied another, clearly trembling. John reached the top step. He stopped moving, becoming one with the darkness that enveloped the hallway. He knew the guards' eyes were fixed on the entrance, their hands trembling on the handles of their guns. Like an animal approaching its prey, John peeked out just enough for his silhouette to be visible. The fear he felt was not for himself, but for the men waiting for him. They were just scared soldiers. And as if in response to his thoughts, the room filled with the sound of bullets, a chorus of frantic gunfire. The sound of cartridges falling to the floor echoed. The bullets tore through the air right where his head should have been, hitting the wall with impotent fury. John, safe in his hiding place, remained motionless. He waited for the storm of bullets to end. He peeked out and saw the two guards, their arms shaking, their hands searching their vests for spare magazines. They had rushed in. It was an execution, not a fight. With deadly fluidity, John drew his P30L. He aimed with methodical precision. One shot, one man. The other, a few seconds later. Both fell to the ground with a muffled thud. Their bodies twitched a couple of times, then lay motionless in a pool of their own blood. John moved forward. He ignored the bodies, his eyes already focused on his next target, an armored door with a small security keypad. A surveillance camera, a small red glass eye, was to one side. With the same calm with which he had waited on the stairs, he raised his pistol and aimed it at the camera. His index finger settled on the trigger, but he did not fire. Instead, his gaze fixed directly on the lens. His voice, a deep whisper, colder than ice, filled the silence. "I know you're there," he said, looking directly at the camera. "If you don't open the door, I swear I'll burn the whole place down with you inside." There was a pause, a moment when the silence was so heavy you could almost feel it. "We'll see if you're brave enough to die in silence." The man in the cap, his face pale and his hands shaking, recoiled from the console as if he had been burned. The man with the mustache, standing next to him, was equally petrified. John's voice, filtered through the speakers, continued to echo in the air. "Damn it, I knew it," shouted the man in the cap, putting his hands to his head. "He found us. Now he's coming for us." The man with the mustache, his eyes fixed on the black screen, shook his head, his face a reflection of pure terror. No, it can't be. I cut off communications a while ago, remember? And we've closed the door. He doesn't know anything about us, he's just lying to us." "What if he's not? What if it's not a lie?" The man in the cap approached the reinforced door, his hand trembling as he swiped his fingerprint reader. "He's going to burn us. Like rats. In a minute, it'll be a torch. We have to get out of here. We have to get out now." "Are you crazy? It's a trap. The moment you open the door, he'll come in and kill us both. Haven't you seen what he did to the others? He wants us here, locked up and scared, so we'll open the door for him. Let him have the building. We can live another day," replied the man with the mustache, pushing him away from the door control panel. The argument was heated. Their voices trembled, their words stumbled. Each of them, looking into the other's face, saw fear in their eyes. One sought to escape, the other tried to survive by hiding. "I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you I'm scared to death. I'm not staying here to die," shouted the man in the cap, pushing harder and throwing the man with the mustache against the console table. But on the screens, they were surprised. John's figure, clearly visible on the camera screen, turned around. He was walking away from the door. He moved with the same coldness and determination with which he had arrived. "See, he's leaving. He's tired. Now we can," the man with the mustache began with a sigh of relief, but his voice suddenly trailed off. John stopped in the middle of the hallway and raised his P30L. A flash, a crackle of static. The camera monitor in the main hallway on the second floor went blank, showing only a black screen. Then he moved into the side hallway. He aimed again. The next screen went dark. He moved with purpose, destroying the eyes that saw him. He did it so calmly, without a trace of hesitation, that it was almost unreal. One monitor after another went dark, until the room was filled with a mosaic of black screens. The monitoring room was plunged into darkness. The man with the mustache and the man with the cap stood frozen, their breathing the only sounds in the air. "Damn it," whispered the man with the mustache, his voice a thread that could barely be heard. "What has he done?" "He's blinded us," replied the man with the cap, his voice a hollow echo. "He knows where we are, but we don't know where he is." A metallic thud echoed on the door. Both men tensed. Wait, said the man with the mustache, his eyes wide. "It has to be a mistake. Maybe the cameras broke." "Don't be an idiot. He shot every single one of them," the man in the cap shouted, his panic turning to rage. "And now he's out there, at the door, waiting for us to open it. What do? We can't stay here forever." "We can't go anywhere," the man with the mustache whispered, his voice more confident than before. "We've locked the door. We'll be fine. We just have to wait for him to leave or for backup to arrive." "Reinforcements? What damn reinforcements? That's it. All we can do is try to get out. Now," shouted the man in the cap. He tried to run to the control panel, but the man with the mustache grabbed him by the arm. "I told you to stop. It's a trap. He wants us out, can't you see? Let me go. I'm not going to stay here and die." The argument turned into a chaotic scene of shouting and shoving. Anger and fear, like a virus, consumed them. The man in the cap pushed the other man with brutal force, sending him crashing into a table full of papers and creating a mess. The man with the mustache got up and threw a punch that hit the man in the cap in the face, who in turn responded with a blow to the jaw. The air was filled with the sounds of the fight, the blows, the gasps, the sounds of skin colliding. Then a new smell slipped under the reinforced door. It was a pungent, slightly sweet smell, the smell of burning paper. The two men froze. They looked at each other. Their fists dropped, their rage transformed into primal terror. "Do you smell that?" whispered the man in the cap, his voice trembling. "Yes, no. It can't be. There's a fire coming," the man in the cap shouted, his eyes wide with pure terror. "He's burning the building. I knew it. They rushed to the door's control panel, desperation written all over their faces. "Open the door, now. We have to get out of here," shouted the man with the mustache. "He told us he would do it, and he did." With trembling hands, the man in the cap swiped the access card through the fingerprint reader. The lock clicked. The door opened a centimeter. A column of thick gray smoke seeped through the crack. The two men looked at each other, their faces masks of terror. The man with the mustache threw the door open, intending to run out. But there was no fire on the floor of the hallway. There was only a small piece of paper, folded and smoking. A simple lighter and a piece of paper. Nothing else. The man with the mustache stopped, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. His brain, consumed by terror, had refused to think clearly, causing him to fall into the trap. It was a distraction, a psychological game. "Damn it," he whispered. "He tricked us. There's no. John Wick's voice filled the small room. His tone was calm, almost a whisper, with a trace of dark humor that chilled the blood of both men. "Knock, knock," John said. The man with the mustache spun around suddenly, but he didn't see him. He only felt a knee slam into his stomach. The blow knocked the wind out of him and doubled him over, throwing him to the ground with a cry of pain. At the same time, the man in the cap felt a sharp blow to his groin. Unbearable pain shot through his body, and he fell to his knees, hands clutching his groin, moaning. John stopped. The two men writhed on the ground, suffocated by pain and shame. John looked at them. His expressionless face was illuminated by the dim reflection of the turned-off monitors. John leaned over, pulled out his P30L pistol, aimed, and stared at them. The man with the mustache, still writhing in pain on the floor, raised his head and looked at the man in the cap. "It's your fault," he spat, his voice full of resentment. "We should have stayed." Before he could continue, a black leather boot slammed into his mouth. The blow knocked him to the floor, and a small trickle of blood ran down his lip. John paid no attention, his icy gaze fixed on both men. "You can only speak when I tell you to." His voice was an authoritative whisper, more terrifying than any shout. "Understood. One wrong answer, and you die." No one moved. John raised the gun and aimed right next to the man in the cap's head. Bang! The shot broke the silence, leaving a sharp ringing in the man in the cap's ear. John lowered the gun and pointed it back at the two men. The man with the mustache, his mouth bloody, spat on the floor, a mixture of resignation and fury in his eyes. John ignored him. "Answer me, who's your boss?" John asked, his voice calm. Silence. Neither of them spoke. John's patience ran out. He pulled a knife from his jacket. The metal, stained with the dried blood of the guards below, glinted ominously in the dim light. "If you don't answer, you'll start losing body parts," he said, with eerie calm. Goosebumps ran down the man in the cap's body. Fear overcame his loyalty, which didn't really exist. "Dr. William Birkin," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "He's in charge of this pharmacy." John nodded, his gaze darkening. "What other umbrella institutions are under this doctor's direction?" The man in the cap, trembling, lowered his voice. The Raccoon City School, and a nursing home." John's expression hardened. His face became a mask of ice. "The elderly and children?" he asked, his voice an icy tune. "Umbrella experiments on them." The man with the mustache, blood dripping from his mouth, laughed mockingly. "So you think you're a hero, huh? Like the ones in those stories with happy endings?" John Wick stood motionless. The coldness in his gaze was palpable. "No, I'm not a hero," he said in a low, deadly voice. "But in this world, there are lines that cannot be crossed, and by the way, wrong answer." Before the man with the mustache could say anything, John raised his .30L and shot him directly in the head. The bullet pierced his skull, and the body fell to the ground with a thud. The man in the cap, his eyes wide, went blank. His mouth hung open in shock, unable to comprehend what had happened. John bent down and put the barrel of the gun to his head. The man in the cap, sweat running down his forehead, froze. Wait, I know more. I'll tell you more. Please don't kill me." "You have 1 minute, John said, his voice a cold whisper. "Say something useful, something I don't know, something that isn't a stupid lie. Otherwise, I'll kill you." The man in the cap, panicking, stammered, his words jumbled in his throat. "Umbrella has a secret base on the moon. They have a biological weapon that can revive dinosaurs. It's real, I swear." John's expression didn't change. The desperation and lies were so clear in the man's eyes. The absurd statement confirmed that the man was just trying to buy time, to say anything to escape the inevitable. Without a second's hesitation, John fired. The echo of the shot reverberated in the silence of the room. The man collapsed, his head hitting the floor. The body lay motionless, a pool of blood spreading across the floor of the monitoring room. John Wick stood, his gaze sweeping across the room. Two motionless bodies on the floor, two souls lost in Umbrella's game. The pharmacy had been one more step, but his journey was much longer. As he inspected the monitoring room, John quickly realized there was nothing else of value. The computers were locked, the paper files were just useless medical records. He already had the information he needed. There was nothing left to do there, and with methodical precision, he moved around the room. He took several bottles of medical spray and alcohol-based disinfectants from a nearby shelf. He emptied the contents onto the papers scattered on the floor and sprayed the flammable liquids onto the bodies and computer equipment. With the acrid smell of alcohol filling the air, he approached the armored door panel. He opened the door, crouched down in the hallway, and used the last cartridge in his .30L. A single shot, aimed at the alcohol-soaked floor, caused a flash and then an explosion of flames that spread with terrifying speed. The flames caught instantly, consuming the papers and licking the walls. The heat of the fire was intense and quickly spread down the hallway. John didn't stop to watch. He moved away from the fire, the siren of a police car sounding in the distance, a distant echo of the justice he was about to unleash. His suit, impeccable despite the blood and chaos, moved in the darkness, a silhouette fading into the night. The fire spread, devouring the Umbrella Pharmacy, a symbol of the terror it had instilled in the place. John moved through the streets of Raccoon City with the silent grace of a ghost. The police sirens were a distant moan, a sound that dissolved into the stench in the air. He felt like an extension of the city, a predator gliding through the shadows, invisible to the eyes of the frightened citizens. There was no remorse in his heart, only cold, brutal determination. He was no hero, he was a force of nature, a killing machine that had been activated. Every step was precise, every movement calculated. John Wick's gaze remained fixed, unblinking. The sound of his footsteps, a silent rhythm against the pavement, was an echo of his heart beating with coldness and steady speed. The hotel stood like a fortress of tranquility amid the turmoil of the night. John Wick crossed the threshold, leaving behind the distant clamor of sirens and the smell of smoke. The lobby, with its warm lighting and deathly silence, was a sanctuary. Behind the counter, the receptionist, a man with the same stony expression as always, looked up. His gaze lingered on John's suit, on the dark stains and the fatigue reflected in his eyes. For a moment, the man's mask of indifference cracked, revealing a fleeting expression of alarm. John Wick entered the hotel, his dark silhouette framed by the revolving door. The receptionist, a man with a serious face and tired eyes, barely blinked when he saw him. John's gaze did not waver, but his eyes locked with his. In an imperceptible movement, he slid a wad of bills across the counter. The top bill, crumpled and stained, was a silent witness to the day he had had. "Silence," whispered John, his voice a grave and cold reminder. At the same time, he slid his hand over the P30L pistol hidden in his belt. The fabric of his jacket shifted, revealing the outline of the weapon. The threat was silent, clear, and unmistakable. The receptionist's gaze shifted from the money to the gun. He nodded, his voice a faint thread. "Understood, Mr. Wick." The receptionist, still watching John, slid the wad under the counter, his long, thin fingers counting the bills. John nodded and headed for his room. When he reached the door, he didn't go in right away. Instead, he took a small hook out of his pocket and placed it on top of the door. Then, with the dexterity of a surgeon, he took another gun from his belt. Using fishing line, he tied the gun to the door. If anyone dared to force their way in, the door would open, and the gun would automatically fire, aiming right at the center of the door. A safety measure that was never too much. When the trap was ready, he went inside. He took off his suit and discarded all his weapons, his knives, his guns. Looking at himself in the mirror, he was neither a businessman nor a ghost. He was just a man, his hands stained with blood, his body tired, and his eyes empty. He thought about what he had found in the Umbrella Pharmacy, the nursing home and the school. The idea that such a despicable company would dare to experiment on the elderly and children turned his stomach. The anger he had felt before intensified, a cold fire burning inside him. Then he headed to the bathroom. As he sank into the tub, the warm water offered him temporary relief, soothing his tense muscles and the pain in his back. He closed his eyes and thought. He needed information. Umbrella controlled parts of this city, but he didn't know everything. He needed to know the extent of their resources. Despite his exhaustion, his mind focused on one name, Jill Valentine. He knew from the news that she was under surveillance, that she had become a problem for Umbrella. He realized that the only way to find Jill was to look for her in her apartment, but he would need to be more stealthy than ever. The Raccoon City police would have surveillance agents nearby, as she was under police investigation. Exhaustion overtook him. He had been on constant alert for 2 days, his mind had not given him a break. He knew he couldn't go on like this, that he needed sleep to regain his agility and lucidity. For the first time in a long time, he surrendered to his body. He dried himself off, lay down on the bed, and closed his eyes. The last thing he saw, through his bedroom window, was a column of gray and orange smoke rising in the distance. The echo of a siren faded into the darkness. The fire at the Umbrella Pharmacy spread, a beacon of his vengeance. And as the fire burned, John Wick fell asleep, his dream a sigh of relief, the promise of destruction to come. Chapter 10. A New Tomorrow. September 26th, Raccoon City. Jill's apartment, 10 a.m. The first ray of sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting a thin golden line on the wall. Jill Valentine woke up feeling just as heavy as she had gone to bed. Time, once measured by missions and investigations, had now become a series of identical days, filled with tense silence and frustration that gnawed at her insides. She got out of bed, dragging her feet to the bathroom. She looked in the mirror. The face she saw was the same as always, the face of a warrior who had seen too much darkness. But there was something else. A slight shadow of fatigue under her eyes, not so visible, but the trace of a dream that was not restful. Her brown hair, normally tied back, fell messily over her shoulders. Her skin was pale, her lips colorless. She brushed her teeth mechanically, her mind in a zone of calm, of routine. As the brush moved, her thoughts drifted to the movie she had watched the night before to de-stress. It was a movie about a killer. Not just any killer, but one who had come out of retirement to take revenge on a criminal gang that had taken everything from him, even the life of his dog. It was a good movie, one that had given him some relief, one that had allowed him to escape, even if only for a couple of hours, from his own reality. After brushing his teeth, he went to the kitchen. The quiet, small apartment was a refuge from the outside world. She poured herself a bowl of cereal, the sound of the flakes falling into the bowl of milk a familiar whisper breaking the morning stillness. She sat down at the small kitchen table and turned on the TV. The voice of a news anchor, with the serious tone they use for bad news, filled the room. In breaking news, a massive fire at the Umbrella pharmaceutical plant in the east of the city has left police with more questions than answers. Jill paused, the bowl halfway to her mouth. Her pulse, which had been calm, began to quicken. Preliminary reports indicate that the fire, which consumed the building in a matter of minutes, spread rapidly. The bodies of the staff have been recovered, but the fire has left them unrecognizable. The anchor paused, looking at the camera with forced solemnity. It has been confirmed that there are no survivors, except for the night shift employee, who was found unconscious at the entrance to the pharmacy and is currently under interrogation at the police station. Jill dropped her spoon into the bowl with a soft clink. Her mind, trained in the academy and on the battlefield, began to process the information. A fire, a pharmacy, an accident. The police would investigate it as such, but her instinct screamed that something wasn't right. The Umbrella Pharmacy was not just any place, and the idea that a fire could kill everyone except one person was absurd. A fire, even one of chemical origin, is rarely that precise. Her mind raced. It wasn't a fire, it was a purge. An attack. Who could have done this? A special forces team, perhaps. But what special forces would be foolish enough to burn down a building and leave such an obvious trail? Unless, the trail wasn't a mistake, but a warning. A message. A brutal, cold, lethal message. The spoon floated in the milk. The cereal, with its vanilla flavor, had become tasteless. The news played over and over, and the anchor's face, with its same forced solemnity, looked like a smudge in her peripheral vision. A chill ran down her spine. Whoever was behind this was no ordinary criminal. This was someone who wasn't afraid, someone who was moving with calculated precision. And in the darkness of her apartment, with the echo of the anchor's voice reverberating, Jill Valentine realized she was not alone in her war against Umbrella. A new player had entered the game. The news anchor, her voice grave, moved on to another story. And in other news, a macabre discovery in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town has alarmed residents. Several bodies in an advanced state of decomposition have been found. The anchor's voice softened slightly as she showed an image of a woman speaking to the camera. We spoke with neighbors in the area, who reported that a foul odor was what alerted them. The image of the reporter faded and the anchor returned, her previously serious face now showing a hint of surprise and confusion. The police, who are at the scene, have reported that the bodies appeared to be those of drug addicts and some local criminals. But the strangest thing is that no fingerprints have been found, as if the killer were a ghost. The presenter paused again, her gaze turning to a piece of paper in her hand. And a body has been found, which appears to have been bitten, causing concern among residents. They wonder if the killer could be the same one who was in the Arklay Mountains. Jill's breath caught in her throat. The bites. Her mind made an instant connection. The same pattern as the deaths in the mountains, when a group of monsters devoured most of the Bravo team members. How could this be related to the fire at the pharmacy? Her police mind made her frown. The deaths in the warehouse, the fire at the pharmacy, and the death of several men in an alley, which the news anchor was reporting on in the next story. The police were alarmed by the growing number of deaths in the last few hours. Jill couldn't stop thinking about the strange coincidence of events. The fire, the massacre in the warehouse, the bodies in the alley. Her instinct told her that something was unusual, that there was a shadow connecting everything, even though her professional mind couldn't find a direct logical correlation. It was just a vague suspicion, an intuition that unsettled her. With her bowl of cereal finished, Jill put it in the sink. A desire to investigate, a need she felt deep within herself, overwhelmed her. But she knew she couldn't do it. Her boss, that idiot Brian Irons, had suspended her over the mountain massacre, and now she was under constant surveillance, as if she were a criminal. She looked out the window, down at the street, and saw a police car parked there, like a silent shadow, watching her. With a sigh of resignation, she slumped down on the sofa. She picked up the remote and changed the channel, looking for a little distraction. Concern about the news consumed her, and the helplessness of not being able to do anything made her feel useless. Far from the action, far from her colleagues. She missed Chris and Barry. She was alone, and she knew she was in Umbrella's crosshairs. September 26th, Raccoon City, John Wick's hotel room, 9:30 a.m. The soft hum of the air conditioner was the first sound John Wick registered upon waking. He had slept, a deep, uninterrupted sleep, the first in days. He felt his energy renewed, every muscle taut, ready for action. The fatigue that had consumed him the night before had vanished, replaced by steely concentration. He rose from the bed, his body a perfectly tuned machine. He began his morning routine, stretching and strength exercises, fluid movements that seemed more like a dance than a workout. As his muscles warmed up, his mind replayed the events of the night. The umbrella pharmacy, the fire, the bodies. A clear warning. He thought of Dr. William Birkin, of the school and the nursing home the employee had mentioned. Attacking those places would be an immense risk, not for Umbrella's security, but for the inevitable presence of innocents. Children, elderly people, precision would be key, a surgical strike to dismantle the operation without causing more unnecessary deaths. As the hot water from the shower hit his skin, a name came back to his mind, Jill Valentine. The police, the one who had been involved in the Arklay Mountains affair. She had confronted Umbrella directly, she knew what they were doing. She might have the missing piece to understand the big picture, a vision that he lacked. It would be much more efficient than going in blind, searching for clues in every corner. He got out of the shower, dried himself off, and put on his most elegant suit, the immaculate black one that felt like a second skin. Every movement was deliberate, every adjustment a preparation for the impending confrontation. He stowed his concealed weapons, his knives in his P30L with silencer, distributing them at strategic points under the fabric. He looked at himself in the mirror, Baba Yaga reflected in the darkness of his eyes. As he left the room, the receptionist greeted him with his usual formality. John just nodded, his face expressionless. The street greeted him with the morning sun, a stark contrast to the darkness of his thoughts. He glanced at his wristwatch, 9:30 a.m. It was time. He headed in the direction of Jill's apartment, vaguely remembering the number given to him by the man he had interrogated, and then killed. As John walked through the bustling streets of Raccoon City, the sound of cars, the chatter of people, and the echo of whispers about the news mingled in a whirlwind. Did you hear about the warehouse? They say they found bodies, bitten. Yeah, and the umbrella pharmacy. They say it was a horrible fire. Poor people. This is getting weird, isn't it? Too many things happening all of a sudden. It was a busy morning. People were rushing to work, shops were opening their doors, and the aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread filled the air, trying to mask the underlying stench of the city. John moved through the crowd, an elegant shadow, invisible to the ordinary eye. As he approached Jill's apartment building, his eyes locked onto the target. There it was, a police patrol car parked directly in front of the entrance. John frowned. 4 police officers. 2 leaning against the car, their caps pushed back, and 2 others at the entrance to the building, their tired eyes scanning the surroundings. John naturally changed course, heading to a small coffee shop across the street. He ordered a black coffee without sugar and leaned against the bar, pretending to read the newspaper, while his eyes, through the reflection in the glass, kept a close watch on the situation. He counted again. 2 in the car, 2 at the entrance. 4. After a few minutes, he noticed a change. The 2 police officers who had been at the entrance to the building straightened up and walked toward the patrol car. The 2 who had been leaning against the car moved toward the entrance to the building, taking their place. It was a routine changing of the guard, but it indicated constant surveillance. The 2 police officers who had been at the entrance headed straight for the cafe. Phew, finally a break, muttered one, a young man with a stubbly beard, as he approached the bar. I don't know what got into Chief Irons to put us on Jill Valentine. What a waste of time. His partner, a burly man with a frown, nodded and took off his cap, running his hand through his hair. You can say that again. Do they expect us to stay here all day with nothing to do? They should pay us more for this nonsense. And with everything that's going on in the city. Fires, bodies in warehouses, and here we are, watching over a former cop. John, leaning on the bar, listened intently. 2 fewer cops at the entrance. It was the perfect moment. His mind, a risk calculator, began to map out the 2 main options for entering the building. The first was brute force, knock out or kill the two cops at the entrance. An option that his combat instinct offered him without hesitation. But they were in the middle of the sidewalk, with people passing by and the sun high in the sky. There would be a scandal before he could even talk to Jill. It wasn't just reckless, it was stupid. It would attract the attention of the entire police department, and with Umbrella already on the prowl, it was an unnecessary risk. The second option was subtlety. Entering as a visitor, someone who was just passing through, visiting an acquaintance inside the building. A plan that better suited his modus operandi, that of a ghost. He thought of names, looking for something common, something that wouldn't arouse suspicion. Olivia, Emma, Charlotte, Sophia. Generic names, easy to remember and sounding innocent. He would only give his first name, to avoid problems if he got a fictitious last name wrong. With his decision made, John left his coffee almost untouched on the bar and straightened up. His movements were fluid, as if he had never been still. He walked toward the entrance of Jill's apartment building, his figure elegant and calm. He approached the entrance with a steady, measured stride, the image of a respectable citizen. The two police officers, now at their post, looked at him with weary, almost bored indifference. John greeted them with a slight smile. "Good morning, officers," John said, his voice calm and polite, without a hint of the tension he felt. The burly policeman who was now guarding the entrance looked him up and down. "Good morning, sir. Who are you looking for in this building?" "I'm here to visit a friend, Olivia," John replied, his voice as natural as if he had known her all his life. His gaze was direct, his eyes cold, but calm enough not to arouse suspicion. The other officer, the young man with the beard, was already reaching for the intercom. "I'm going to confirm it. We can't let just anyone in." "Oh, no, please don't bother," John interrupted with a smile. "That's exactly why it's a surprise. I don't want to ruin it. Just a moment with her." The young policeman hesitated, his hand still on the intercom. John Wick, in his impeccable suit and with his air of normality, did not seem threatening. He looked like a businessman who wanted to visit a friend. After a brief exchange of glances between the two officers, the burly policeman nodded. "All right, sir, you can come in," he said, with a tone of resignation. "But don't cause any trouble." John nodded slightly. "Of course, officers. Have a good day." He entered the building, the sound of the door closing behind him a silent click that marked a small victory. He climbed the stairs with a light step, his senses on high alert. At the entrance, the two policemen watched him disappear up the stairs. "Did you see that, Olivia?" The young policeman chuckled. "I'd bet my last dollar that guy doesn't know any Olivia. He was probably sneaking in to see his girlfriend." "Bah, leave it," replied the burly one, leaning back against the wall. "As long as he doesn't cause any trouble, it's none of our business. We've got enough on our hands with Miss Valentine locked up here." Meanwhile, John climbed the flights of stairs, his eyes scanning each floor. He remembered the number the umbrella agent had given him, 306. When he reached the third floor, he looked for the numbers on the doors. 301, 302, 303. Just as he approached 306, his eyes stopped. At the end of the hallway, sitting on a folding chair next to the door, was another policeman. He was smoking a cigarette, the ash falling onto a newspaper spread out on his knees. And to top it off, his chair was right next to apartment 306. John cursed under his breath. He couldn't use the "visiting Olivia" excuse again. It was too risky, and this cop seemed more alert than the ones at the entrance. He quickly thought of a new strategy. His suit, while elegant, didn't exactly scream journalist. But his presence, his air of seriousness, might be enough. A well-dressed, confident man could pass for many things. He took a deep breath and approached the officer, his footsteps echoing softly in the hallway. The cop looked up from his newspaper, his tired gaze hardening when he saw John. "You can't come any closer, sir. Restricted area," said the officer, his voice harsh, a cigarette hanging from his lips. John stopped a few feet away. "Good morning, officer. I understand. I'm John, a reporter for the Raccoon City Times. I'm here to interview Miss Valentine for a story about recent events." The policeman looked at him skeptically, his eyes narrowed. A puff of smoke escaped from his lips. "Journalist? Huh, I don't recognize that. I'm going to confirm that with my boss." He began to raise his radio to his mouth. John had anticipated this. He was tired of charades. With a quick, explosive movement, his fist slammed into the officer's chin. The blow was sharp, brutal, sending the officer to the ground with a dazed groan. The cigarette flew from his lips, and the newspaper slid from his knees. The cop, dizzy from the impact, tried to draw his gun. But John was faster. A precise kick struck the officer's hand, disarming him. The gun slid across the floor, out of reach. The cop, his eyes bloodshot, opened his mouth to scream. Without hesitation, John lunged at him, one iron hand covering his mouth while the other tightened around his throat. The struggle was brief, silent, life leaving the officer's body until he fell unconscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. John released the policeman, who slumped against the wall like a sack of potatoes. The officer's gun lay on the floor beside him. He picked it up and tucked it discreetly under his jacket, next to his other weapons. There was no time to lose. He approached the door of apartment 306. He knocked on the door with a steady, firm rhythm. Once, twice. Jill Valentine. His voice was a low whisper, but the thick wood absorbed the sound. There was no answer. He knocked again, more impatiently. The situation was beginning to bother him. September 26th. Raccoon City. Jill's apartment. 10:15 a.m. Jill was sitting on the sofa, the television tuned to a boring cooking show, trying to drown out the disturbing news. Suddenly, she heard a knock at her door. Her first reaction was a pang of annoyance. It's probably that idiot cop, she thought. The officer in the hallway was always asking for something: coffee, a glass of water, or just looking for company to pass the time. She was getting tired of his interruptions. She got up from the couch, intending to open the door and tell him to leave her alone, but before she could get close enough, a different voice came from the other side. A deep, unfamiliar voice. Jill Valentine. The sound made her freeze. It wasn't the cop's voice. The relaxation she had felt a second before vanished, replaced by a rush of cold adrenaline. Umbrella. The word echoed in her mind. They had sent someone to silence her. Quickly, her combat instinct took over. There was no time to get dressed for battle. She was wearing short shorts and a blue shirt, her loungewear. Her eyes fixed on her service pistol, which was on the coffee table. She grabbed it, slid it out with an expert movement, the familiar click of the magazine clicking into place. The knocking continued, more insistent, more urgent. Jill moved nimbly, sliding behind the sofa, using it as cover. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. She had to think. She had to escape. But how? Chapter 12. An Unlikely Alliance. September 26th. Raccoon City. Jill's apartment. 10:16 a.m. John Wick stopped in front of Jill Valentine's apartment door. The dim light from the hallway reflected off his suit. The cop, the one from earlier, the one who had been on duty, lay unconscious on the floor, carefully tucked away in the shadows so as not to attract attention. The scene was just as he had imagined it, the end of one long day and the beginning of another. With terrifying stillness, John knocked on the door. 2 knocks, a brief silence. 2 more knocks. There was no answer. His cold, piercing eyes narrowed. 1 second of silence. 2, 3. It was a game of nerves, and John was the master. But the silence grew deeper. "He's gone," whispered a voice in his mind. It was the first and only option he could think of. But John dismissed it. He had 2 days of experience with the people of Raccoon City, and they weren't known for their quick getaways. Umbrella's corrupt cops had been watching her, and it was no coincidence that they had set up a guard post at the door. John's eyes scanned the hallway, his senses on high alert. Any movement, any out-of-place sound, would be his undoing. He knew he couldn't stay in the hallway with a body on the floor. Not for long. If another cop found out he was gone, the situation would turn chaotic. The voice in his head, the voice of a man who had seen too much and lived long enough, whispered to him. "This isn't a game, John. There's no time for nonsense. You have to get her to listen to you, to know that you're not the enemy." "Jill Valentine," he said in a clear, soft, controlled voice. "I'm not here to hurt you." Silence. John waited a minute, but there was no movement or sound inside the apartment. He realized Jill wasn't going to let her guard down. The dark wooden door, with its reinforced lock, stood between John's mission and the only person who could help him accomplish it. "All right," he said to himself, frustration seeping into his voice. "If you don't want to talk, then there's no choice." With the same coldness with which he dispatched his enemies, John Wick took a step back. His gaze fixed on the lock, and then, with the same precision with which he aimed, he raised his right leg and kicked the door. A single movement, a single powerful and precise kick, and the sound of the lock giving way was almost a sigh. The door didn't open completely, but broke in half, leaving a gap at the top. John wasted no time, leaning over and pushing the splintered wood with one hand. The door swung open without resistance. Jill Valentine was there, kneeling behind a sofa, her service pistol in her hand, her eyes wide and full of adrenaline. John entered the apartment, his senses on high alert. His eyes scanned the room, absorbing every detail. The entrance hall, the living room to the left, the furniture arranged with a symmetry that suggested routine. A vase on the table, photographs on the wall, the smell of cleanliness mixed with the faint trace of coffee. Everything seemed to be in its place, everything seemed normal. But appearances were deceiving. The atmosphere of the place told him that something was not right, a tense silence, the stillness of a predator waiting. The voice in his head kept whispering to him, "There's someone here, John." Instincts never lie. Every step, every movement must be calculated. You don't know where she is, but you're looking for her. Don't let your guard down. He moved with the fluidity of a ghost, each step calculated, each movement a deadly dance. His eyes fixed on a door at the end of the hallway, which appeared to be the master bedroom. The doorknob looked to be in perfect condition, but John knew that wasn't the case. With a slow movement, he approached the door, his right hand sliding toward the knob. His heart beat calmly, his mind blank, ready to react to anything. Meanwhile, hidden behind the sofa, Jill Valentine watched. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity, were fixed on the man who had just entered her apartment. He was a large man with broad shoulders and an impeccable suit. His movements were refined, almost like a dance. The man was like a gentleman who had lost his way in the city. But there was something about his aura that made her think he was an important businessman, someone who had nothing to do with Umbrella or the police. He was a man with an aura of danger, but in a strange and almost elegant way. Her mind, trained in the art of battle, focused on the man's movements. She watched him move his head from side to side, carefully observing every corner, every shadow. His eyes were like those of a predator, scanning the terrain in search of prey. His body, though motionless, was ready for action. Jill realized that he was not just a man, he was an assassin. The way he moved, the way his body tensed and relaxed, everything about him was the manifestation of a lifetime dedicated to combat. He was like a ghost moving with deadly fluidity. The intruder had his back to her. A chill ran down her spine. Her mind, which had analyzed and catalogued her prey's every movement, screamed that this was her only chance. But her intuition, the voice that had kept her alive on so many missions, told her that something was not right. It screamed that the man knew, that his back was a trap. He's doing this on purpose. He knows I'm here. This is a test. But instinct overcame her. There was no other option. She couldn't pass up the opportunity, real or not, to end this. Silently, Jill slipped out of her hiding place, her plush bunny slippers making almost no noise on the wooden floor. With each step she took, her heart beat faster, adrenaline rushing through her veins. She moved with surprising speed and grace, her gun in her hand, ready to be used. John, just as he was about to open the door to the room, felt a chill. The air behind him, which had been silent, felt heavy, charged. His mind, beyond logic, screamed a single message: the danger was not in front of him, but behind him. He opened the door to a normal room with a bed, a wardrobe, and a desk. Common things that should be in a room. He was about to close the door when a sound behind him made him stop. The sound of a silent step. John froze, his mind alert, his body ready to react. "Stay still," said a female voice behind him. The voice was firm, with a mocking tone. "And raise your hands." John, with the same calmness he used to take a sip of whiskey, raised his hands. There was no doubt in his mind. The coldness of the gun barrel against his back was proof enough that it wasn't the enemy. "I was looking for you, Jill Valentine," he said calmly. "I wanted to talk to you. A handsome young man in a suit wanting to talk to me." Jill replied with a mocking voice. "If I had seen you before, I would remember you. And if you really just want to talk, you wouldn't have broken down the door, and the fact that the police didn't arrest you only tells me that you work for Umbrella or directly under the orders of that jerk Brian Irons." "You're wrong," John replied, his voice deep and calm. He didn't move. His mind, however, was evaluating every option, every risk. "We have the same enemy. I'm here for Umbrella too." Jill laughed, a hollow sound full of contempt. The adrenaline of the situation had blinded her to logic. Please, the oldest excuse in the book. Put your hands down, get on your knees. John stood his ground. He noticed that a few feet away from Jill, on a small table, there were handcuffs. Jill's response was obvious. She would try to handcuff him. If she succeeded, they would both be in serious trouble. The RPD officer's body lay unconscious in the hallway, a problem that no one would be slow to notice. The apartment door was smashed. No one would have to be a genius to put two and two together. There was no time for games. I'll say it again, Jill Valentine, John said, his voice now urgent. The cop in the hallway is unconscious, the door is smashed. Any minute now, Umbrella will realize what's going on. Unless you want to get arrested, I suggest you listen to me. I want to talk about Umbrella. They're my enemy, too. Jill didn't flinch, the gun still firmly pressed against her back. Shut up, she said quietly, her free hand moving toward the table, searching for the handcuffs. John, sensing Jill's movement, sighed inwardly. This woman is very stubborn. I'll have to make her see reason another way. As Jill was about to grab his wrist to handcuff him, John, with a movement so quick it was barely perceptible, struck Jill's hand with his free hand. The blow was sharp and precise. Jill's hand opened, and the service pistol fell to the floor, sliding across the wooden floor. Jill's face showed a momentary surprise. Just a fraction of a second. Then her expression hardened and she lunged forward. With her left hand open and ready to strike, she lunged at John's face, and at the same time, her left knee shot up, hitting John in the abdomen. John, however, reacted immediately. The blow to his abdomen reminded him of the many he had received. His body, accustomed to it, absorbed it without flinching. He turned, his body swayed, and with a fluid movement, he slid behind Jill. The surprised Jill had no time to react. In an instant, John grabbed her wrist and threw her against the wall. The thud of her body against the wall echoed through the room, and the hanging pictures fell one by one, creating a chorus of pain. Jill, however, did not give up. With the grace of a contortionist, she used the momentum of the blow against the wall to propel herself to the right, her free hand striking John in the chest. John staggered, and Jill, seizing the moment, lunged forward, her knee rising again, this time aimed at John's face. John, in one fluid motion, ducked. Jill's knee shot over his head. Jill realized she wasn't fighting a mere man, but a professional, a man who had trained for battle. Jill backed away, her left hand grazing the sofa. Her heart was pounding. She lunged again, this time with surprising speed and grace. Her body moved like a ghost, a series of quick, deadly movements. Jill struck John's shoulder, then his neck, then his abdomen. John, however, moved like a boxer, his body twisting, absorbing the blows. The two, in a single movement, faced each other. Jill, with a high kick, struck John's shoulder. John, with a quick movement, ducked in with his right hand, grabbed Jill's leg and lifted her up. Jill freed herself with a twist in the air, and with a side kick, hit John's side, causing him to stagger and fall onto the coffee table. The table shattered, scattering pieces across the floor. John, however, did not lose his balance. He got up with a grace that surprised Jill, and in an instant, he slid toward her, his right hand lunging for her neck. Jill, with an expert move, ducked down and, with her right hand, struck John's leg, causing him to lose his balance. The two of them, in a single movement, fell to the floor. The fight continued on the floor, a series of frantic and desperate rolls. The two moved as if they were one, a whirlwind of arms, legs, and bodies. In an instant, John, with a quick and precise movement, managed to immobilize Jill. His arms held her firmly to the floor, while Jill's legs tangled around his ribs, trying to free herself. But before he could complete the pin, Jill, with the strength of desperation, rolled over. Her body twisted, and in one swift motion, she attempted an arm lock. Her hands clamped down on John's elbow, and with a brutal pull, she tried to bend his arm at an unnatural angle to take him out of position. John, however, was no ordinary man. His elbow, strengthened by years of training, held firm. With a cry of frustration, Jill tried harder, but John's arm did not give way. With a quick movement, John hit her in the neck, causing her to lose her grip. John, tired of the woman's stubbornness, felt a wave of frustration wash over him. His eyes, which only seconds before had been a mixture of frustration and respect, turned cold, dark, and dangerous. Slowly, He reached inside his suit, his hand searching for his weapon, the same P-30L he had used to kill his enemies. He pulled out the gun, the sound of metal striking the air echoing. Without hesitation, he put it to Jill's face. The cold tip of the barrel touched her cheek. Jill's body tensed completely, her eyes wide open. Her breathing quickened, and for the first time, she felt a primal fear. "I just want to talk," John said, his voice a whisper that left no room for doubt. The urgency and exhaustion in his voice were palpable. Jill's expression softened, the adrenaline fading. She understood that John was not the enemy. He was just a tired man who wanted to talk. Slowly, John stood up. His body, though sore from the fight, moved with deadly fluidity. He holstered his gun with the same smooth motion he had used to draw it. Then he extended his hand, offering it to Jill to help her up. She accepted John's hand with a gesture of embarrassment. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in Jill's eyes, John saw a trace of shame. She had been wrong. She had overreacted. "Can we talk now?" John asked, his tone ironic, as he brushed a speck of dust from his suit. "I'm sorry," Jill replied, her voice a whisper. I didn't know. I've been waiting for Umbrella to send someone to silence me. My only answer was combat." "I understand," John said, his voice softening, his eyes fixed on Jill's. Then, an almost imperceptible smile appeared on his face. "But you fight like an animal." Jill, blushing at the comment, opened her mouth to respond, but John interrupted her. "The cop. We have to get him inside before anyone sees him." Jill was surprised. Not only had John told the truth from the beginning, but he had also thought about the consequences of the fight. She quickly nodded, and together they approached the apartment entrance. The cop was still unconscious in the hallway. John, with a strength that belied his apparent calm, dragged the policeman's body into the apartment. Meanwhile, Jill hurriedly tried to close the door. The handle was broken, and the metal was bent. With great effort, she managed to push the door enough so that it wasn't obvious that it was broken. Just as the door was about to close, the door to apartment 303 opened. Out came a woman in her 50s, a neighbor Jill knew very well. The woman, whose name was Mrs. Peterson, was the building's gossip. "Jill, dear," Mrs. Peterson said in a sing-song voice. "Are you all right? I heard such a noise. I thought you'd dropped something, or that you were." Jill nervously interrupted her. Yes, Mrs. Peterson. I'm fine. I just dropped a bookshelf." "Oh, of course," said Mrs. Peterson, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And where's the police officer who's always around here?" He went to take a break," Jill lied, with a forced smile. "I was waiting for someone in my room and I wanted some privacy." Mrs. Peterson looked her up and down, her eyes settling on Jill's rumpled, wrinkled clothes. She was about to ask more questions when John stepped out from behind Jill. John, who was more concerned with getting the police officer to safety, had completely ignored the conversation. Mrs. Peterson looked at him, her eyes widening. The sight of John, with his messy hair and wrinkled suit, and Jill, with her disheveled clothes, made her think of a completely different story. "Oh, dear," Mrs. Peterson said with a playful smile. "I see why the officer went to take a break. How nice that you found a date. Next time, use protection, okay? Young people these days." "Mrs. Peterson, it's not what you think." Jill tried, her face red. He didn't." But the neighbor interrupted her, shaking her head with a knowing smile. "You don't have to explain it to me, dear. At my age, I've seen it all. Don't worry, your secret is safe with me." Her gaze fell on John, and she held out her hand. "I'm Mrs. Peterson, your neighbor. Please take good care of Jill. She's a wonderful girl and deserves to be happy." John, his face impassive, shook the woman's hand. His mind, still focused on the unconscious policeman he had just dragged away, did not process the subtext of the conversation. "It's a pleasure, ma'am," he said in his deep voice, the same one he had used to tell Jill that he just wanted to talk. Mrs. Peterson, as if she had found the best gossip of the year, retired to her apartment, closing the door with a murmur of excitement. Jill, her face completely flushed, closed the door to her apartment as quickly as she could, the broken latch making a sharp noise. Without looking at John, she led him into the messy apartment, her face still burning with embarrassment. To be continued.